Welcome back to another live stream. Today, I will be doing a live reading stream of Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate Camille. Sorry, by Kate DeCamille. This is a book that I have read. This is actually the second time I've read it before. Well, technically third, actually, because I read it once years ago when I was in when I was like in middle school, I think. And then I read this again prior to doing this reading stream. Uh, this book has spawned a movie adaptation that starred Dakota Fanning in that title role. So yeah, and we'll be watching that movie. I'll be doing a watch along live stream with that movie. Of course, I'll be having my headphone. I don't know if I'll be watching it like I did with Jurassic Park, or if I'm going to watch it with headphones. That way, I'm still watching it, but I don't get copyright claimed. Either way, I'll be reading this book, and because of how short this book is, if I get it done fast enough, I may actually do a separate book because of how very like. Let me give you a gist of how short this book is. This book is literally like like that. It's literally that long. That's why I'm thinking like if we get done with this book quick enough, I'll read the second book just to get it out of the way. Because I don't really have a need for waiting so long to read it. Uh, so maybe you get two books for one. Maybe. We'll see. But in any case, we're going to go ahead and get started with Because of Winn-Dixie with alternate cover art that I think is a lot better than the cover art that was from the original book, but that's just me. So before we begin, I'm going to go ahead and read the synopsis back here. Making friends in a new town is never easy. But when Opals adopts a stray dog she names after the grocery store where she found him, she learns that friendship and forgiveness can sneak up on you like a sudden storm. This updated edition of Katie Camille's classic novel invites readers to make themselves at home, whether they're experiencing the book for the first time or returning to an old favorite. Uh, and even has a part from the Boston Globe review that says, "Books like these give us hope for the world." And it even gives us a website. Visit KT Camille at website.com. I'm not going to say this just in case people don't want to, just in case. But this book came out in, this book, like I said, originally came out in, yeah, this book originally came out in 2000, but this version of the book was re-released in 2020, likely to celebrate the 20 years since this book has come out. But with that all being said, let's go ahead and get right straight into this book, which was voted by people that wanted me to read this. I did make a poll about this book, and majority of the people wanted this book with Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Lightning Thief, just being that close to tying it up. Really close. It was that close of a thing between the two of them. And I will be having another poll up, but this time there's going to be 5 books. There's going to be 3 of the books that are returning, 1 and 2 new books, one of which I just finished earlier today because I had a lot of time on my hands to read the book, and so I read it, and here we are. So anyway, let's get started with Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DeCamillo. For Tracy and Beck, because they listened first. Chapter 1. My name is India Opal Baloney, and last summer, my daddy, the preacher, sent me to the store for a box of macaroni and cheese, some white rice, and 2 tomatoes, and I came back with a dog. This is what happened. I walked into the produce section of the Winn-Dixie grocery store to pick out my 2 tomatoes, and I almost bumped right into the store manager. He was standing there all red-faced, screaming and waving his arms around. "Who let a dog in here?" he kept on shouting. "Who let a dirty dog in here?" At first I didn't see a dog. There were just a lot of vegetables rolling around on the floor, tomatoes and onions and green peppers. And there was what seemed like a whole army of Winn-Dixie employees running around waving their arms just the same way the store manager was waving his. And then the dog came right around the corner. He was a big dog and ugly, and he looked like he was having a real good time. His tongue was hanging out and he was wagging his tail. He skidded to a stop and smiled right at me. I had never before in my life seen a dog smile, but that is what he did. He pulled back his lips and showed me all his teeth. Then he wagged his tail so hard that he knocked some oranges off a display, and they were rolling everywhere, mixing in with the tomatoes and onions and green peppers. The manager screamed, "Somebody grab that dog!" The dog went running over to the manager, wagging his tail and smiling. He stood up on his hind legs. You could tell that all he wanted to do was get face to face with the manager and thank him for the good time he was having in the produce department, but somehow he ended up knocking the manager over. And the manager must have been having a bad day because lying there on the floor, right in front of everybody, he started to cry. The dog leaned over him real concerned and licked his face. "Please," said the manager, "somebody call the pound." "Wait a minute," I hollered. "That's my dog. Don't call the pound." All the Winn-Dixie employees turned around and looked at me, and I knew I had done something big. It made me stupid, too. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't let that dog go to the pound. "Here, boy," I said. The dog stopped licking the manager's face and put his ears up in the air and looked at me like he was trying to remember where he knew me from. "Here, boy," I said again. And then I figured that the dog was probably just like everybody else in the world, that he would want to get called by a name, only I didn't know what his name was, so I just said the first thing that came into my head. I said, "Here, Winn-Dixie." And that dog came trotting over to me just like he had been doing it his whole life. The manager sat up and gave me a hard stare, like maybe I was making fun of him. "It's his name," I said. "Honest." The manager said, "Don't you know not to bring a dog into a grocery store?" "Yes, sir," I told him. "He got in by mistake. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "Come on, Winn-Dixie," I said to the dog. I started walking and he followed along behind me as I went out of the produce department and down the cereal aisle and past all the cashiers and out the door. Once we were safe outside, I checked him over real careful, and he didn't look that good. He was big, but skinny. You could see his ribs, and there were bald patches all over him, places where he didn't have any fur at all. Mostly he looked like a big piece of old brown carpet that had been left out in the rain. "You're a mess," I told him. "I bet you don't belong to anybody." He smiled at me. He did that thing again where he pulled back his lips and showed me his teeth. He smiled so big that it made him sneeze. It was like he was saying, "I know I'm a mess. Isn't it funny?" It's hard not to immediately fall in love with a dog who has a good sense of humor. "Come on," I told him. "Let's see what the preacher has to say about you." And the two of us, me and Winn-Dixie, started walking home. Chapter 2. Oh, let me make sure nothing's coming up here. Make sure I can see that. Alright, there we go. Chapter 2. That summer I found Winn-Dixie was also the summer me and the preacher moved to Naomi, Florida, so he could be the new preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. My daddy is a good preacher and a nice man, but sometimes... Geez, somebody making noise out there. I'll finish that sentence up real quick. My daddy is a good preacher and a nice man, but sometimes it's hard for me to think about him as my daddy because he spends so much time preaching or thinking about preaching or getting ready to preach. And so, in my mind, I think of him as the preacher. Before I was born, he was a missionary in India, and that is how I got my first name. But he calls me by my second name, Opal, because that was his mother's name, and he loved her a lot. Anyway, while me and Winn-Dixie walked home, I told him how I got my name, and I told him how I had just moved to Naomi. I also told him about the preacher and how he was a good man, even if he was too distracted with sermons and prayers and suffering people to go grocery shopping. But you know what? I told Winn-Dixie. You are not a suffering dog, so maybe he won't take to you right away. Maybe he'll let me keep you. Winn-Dixie looked up at me and wagged his tail. He was kind of limping, like something was wrong with one of his legs, and I have to admit he stunk. Bad. He was an ugly dog, but already I loved him with all my heart. When we got to the Friendly Corners trailer park, I told Winn-Dixie that he had to behave right and be quiet, because this was an all-adult trailer park and the only reason I got to live in it was because the preacher was a preacher and I was a good quiet kid. I was what the Friendly Corners trailer park manager, Mr. Alfred, called an exception. And I told Winn-Dixie he had to act like an exception too. Specifically, I told him not to pick any fights with Mr. Alfred's cats or Mrs. Detweiler's little yappy Yorkie dog, Samuel. Winn-Dixie looked up at me while I was telling him everything, and I swear he understood. Sit, I told him when we got to my trailer. He sat right down. He had good manners. Stay here, I tell him. I'll be right back. The preacher was sitting in the living room, working at the little fold-out table. He had paper spread all around him, and he was rubbing his nose, which always means he is thinking. Hard. Daddy, I said. He said back. Daddy, do you know how you always tell me that we should help those less fortunate than ourselves? He said. He rubbed his nose and looked around at his papers. Well, I said, I found a less fortunate at the grocery store. Is that right? He said. Yes, sir, I told him. Ugh. I stared at the preacher really hard. Sometimes he reminded me of a turtle hiding inside its shell, in there thinking about things and not even sticking his head out into the world. Daddy, I was wondering, could he stay with us for a while? Finally, the preacher looked up at me. Opal, he said, what are you talking about? I found a dog, I told him, and I want to keep him. No dogs, the preacher said. We've talked about this before. You don't need a dog. I know it, I said. I know I don't need a dog, but this dog needs me. Look, I said. I went to the trailer door and I hollered, Winn-Dixie! Winn-Dixie's ear shot up in the air and he grinned and sneezed, and then he came limping up the steps and into the trailer and put his head right in the preacher's lap, right on top of a pile of papers. The preacher looked at Winn-Dixie. He looked at his ribs and his matted up fur and the places where he was bald. The preacher's nose wrinkled up. Like I said, the dog smelled pretty bad. Winn-Dixie looked up at the preacher. He pulled back his lips and showed the preacher all of his crooked yellow teeth and wagged his tail and knocked some of the preacher's papers off the table. Then he sneezed and some more papers flooded to the floor. What did you call this dog? The preacher asked. Winn-Dixie, I whispered. I was afraid to say anything too loud. I could see that Winn-Dixie was having a good effect on the preacher. He was making him poke his head out of his shell. Well, said the preacher, he's a stray if I've ever seen one. He put down his pencil and scratched Winn-Dixie behind the ears. And a less fortunate too, that's for sure. Are you looking for a home? The preacher asked, real soft, to Winn-Dixie. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail. Well, the preacher said, I guess you've found one. Chapter 3. I started in on Winn-Dixie right away, trying to clean him up. First I gave him a bath. I used the garden hose and some baby shampoo. He stood still for it, but I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted, and the whole time He didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. After he was all washed and dried, I brushed him good. I used my own hairbrush and worked real hard at all the knots and patches of fur stuck together. He didn't mind being brushed. He wiggled his back like it felt pretty good. The whole time I was working on him, I was talking to him, and he listened. I told him how we were alike. See, I said, you don't have any family, and neither do I. I've got the preacher, of course, but I don't have a mama. I mean, I have one, but I don't know where she is. She left when I was 3 years old. I can't hardly remember her, and I bet you don't remember your mama much either. So we're almost like orphans. Winn-Dixie looked straight at me when I said that to him, like he was feeling relieved to finally have somebody understood his situation. I nodded my head at him and went on talking. I don't even have any friends because I had to leave them all behind when we moved here from Watley. Watley's up in North Florida. Have you ever been to North Florida? Winn-Dixie looked down at the ground, like he was trying to remember if he had. You know what? I said. Ever since we moved here, I've been thinking about my mama extra hard, more than I ever did when I was in Watley. Winn-Dixie twitched his ears and raised his eyebrows. I think the preacher thinks about my mama all the time, too. He's still in love with her. I know that because I heard the ladies at the church in Watley talking about him. They said he's still hoping she'll come back, but he doesn't tell me that. He won't talk to me about her at all. I want to know more about her, but I'm afraid to ask the preacher. I'm afraid he'll get mad at me. Winn-Dixie looked at me hard, like he was trying to say something. What? I said. He stared at me. You think I should make the preacher tell me about her? Winn-Dixie looked at me so hard he sneezed. I'll think about it, I said. When I was done working on him, Winn-Dixie looked a whole lot better. He still had his bald spots, but the fur that he did have cleaned up nice. It was all shiny and soft. You could still see his ribs, but I intend to feed him good, and that would take care of that. I couldn't do anything about his crooked yellow teeth because he got into a sneezing fit every time I started brushing them with my toothbrush, and I finally had to give up. But for the most part, he looked a whole lot better, and so I took him into the trailer and showed him to the preacher. Daddy, I said. He said. He was working on his sermon and kind of muttering to himself. Daddy, I wanted to show you the new Winn-Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose, and finally he looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn-Dixie. Well now, don't you look handsome? Winn-Dixie smiled back at the preacher. He went over and put his head in the preacher's lap. He smells nice, too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Daddy, I said real quick before I lost all my nerve, I've been talking to Winn-Dixie. Is that right? The preacher said. He scratched Winn-Dixie's head. I've been talking to him, and he agreed with me that since I'm 10 years old, you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Just 10 things, that's all. The preacher stopped rubbing Winn-Dixie's head and held real still. I could see him thinking about pulling his head back into his shell. 1 thing for each year I've been alive, I told him. Please. Winn-Dixie looked up at the preacher and kind of gave him a nudge with his nose. The preacher sighed. He said to Winn-Dixie, I should have guessed you were going to be trouble. Then he looked at me. Come on, Opal, he said. Sit down, and I will tell you 10 things about your mama. Chapter 4. 1, said the preacher. We were sitting on the couch and Winn-Dixie was sitting between us. Winn-Dixie had already decided that he liked the couch a lot. 1, said the preacher again. Winn-Dixie looked at him kind of hard. Your mama was funny. She could make just about anybody laugh. 2, he said. She had red hair and freckles. Just like me, I said. Just like you, the preacher nodded. 3, she liked to plant things. She had a talent for it. She could stick a tire in the ground and grow a car. Winn-Dixie started chewing on his paw and I tapped him on the head to make him stop. 4, said the preacher. She could run fast. If you were racing her, you could never let her get a head start because she would beat you for sure. I'm that way too, I said. Back home in Watley, I raced Liam Fullerton and beat him, and he said it wasn't fair because boys and girls shouldn't race each other to begin with. I told him he was just a sore loser. The preacher nodded. He was quiet for a minute. I'm ready for number 5, I told him. 5, he said. She couldn't cook. She burned everything, including water. She had a hard time opening a can of beans. She couldn't make head nor tail of a piece of meat. 6. The preacher rubbed his nose and looked up at the ceiling. Winn-Dixie looked up too. Number 6 is that your mama loved a story. She would sit and listen to stories all day long. She loved to be told a story. She especially liked funny ones, stories that made her laugh. The preacher nodded his head like he was agreeing with himself. What's number 7? I asked. Let's see, he said. She knew all the constellations, every planet in the nighttime sky, every last one of them. She could name them and point them out, and she never got tired of looking up at them. Number 8, said the preacher with his eyes closed, was that she hated being a preacher's wife. She said she just couldn't stand having the ladies at church judge what she was wearing and what she was cooking and how she was singing. She said it made her feel like a bug under a microscope. Winn-Dixie lay down on the couch. He put his nose in the preacher's lap and his tail in mine. 10, said the preacher. 9, I told him. 9, said the preacher. She drank. She drank beer and whiskey and wine. Sometimes she couldn't stop drinking, and that made me and your mama fight quite a bit. Number 10, he said with a long sigh. Number 10 is that your mama loved you. She loved you very much. But she left me, I told him. She left us, said the preacher softly. I could see him pulling his old turtle head back into his stupid turtle shell. She packed her bags and left us, and she didn't leave one thing behind. Okay, I said. I got up off the couch. Winn-Dixie hopped off too. Thank you for telling me, I said. I went back to my room and wrote down all 10 things that the preacher had told me. I wrote them down just the way he had said them to me so I wouldn't forget them, and then I read them out loud to Winn-Dixie until I had them memorized. I wanted to know those 10 things inside and out. That way, if my mama ever came back, I could recognize her, and I would be able to grab her and hold on to her tight and not let her get away from me again. That's the one thing that people need to understand. Like, you know, it's like obviously people like to assume with having a drinking problem to be mainly associated with the males over the females. But females can just as easily get drunk as men can. For obvious reasons. That's why it don't matter who you are, drinking is still drinking. The only problem is when a guy gets drunk, people are very careful around him. But yet, to a certain degree, not everybody, by the way, when I say this, but to some people, a drunk woman is easy prey. And I say to some people because there are people that are asshole enough to, instead of helping a woman out in some way, they try to have their way with them, try to confuse them, manipulate them, all that jazz. That's why you gotta be careful around bars and why they always tell you to drink responsibly. Because if you don't, you're gonna end up drunk and who knows what's gonna happen after that. That's both a warning and some education on you guys. Because, like I said, it don't matter who you are, Drinking is drinking. Anybody can get drunk, no matter how easy it is for one gender or the other. It doesn't matter. What matters is people can get drunk and people need to drink responsibly, so that way they don't get in trouble. And drinking can go a long way. It can go definitely a long way if you try to drive while drunk, which is a big ol' no-no. Because people, if they are too drunk by way of the law, like how the law states what is and like what the legal drinking limit is, which to my knowledge is 0.008. Um, That's the legal drinking limit. If you go anywhere above that, you are considered a drunk driver. So that's why you should drink responsibly and don't drink if you're going to be the driver in some way with other people. And if you're drunk, I know there was actually a joke that I remember with that Gabriel Iglesias once said, the best way to get to know somebody is to have the two of you order a couple of drinks. Like, well, first off, have a list of questions you would want to ask somebody on their date, right? Like that you're on a date with. Have a couple of drinks, not too many, but have a couple of drinks, and then ask the questions, and somehow that would tell you whether if somebody is being honest or not, which I don't understand how that logic works, but if it works for him, fine. I'm not one to judge as long as nobody gets in trouble with the law. Just saying. Moving on. Chapter 5. Winn-Dixie couldn't stand to be left alone. We found that out real quick. If me and the preacher went off and left him by himself in the trailer, he pulled all the cushions off the couch and all the toilet paper off the roll. So we started tying them up outside with a rope when we left. That didn't work either. Winn-Dixie howled until Samuel, Mrs. Detweiler's dog, started howling too. It was exactly the kind of noise that people in an all-adult trailer park did not like to hear. He just doesn't want to be left alone, I told the preacher. That's all. Let's take him with us. I could understand the way Winn-Dixie felt. Getting, excuse me, getting left behind probably made his heart feel empty. After a while, the preacher gave in, and everywhere we went, we took Winn-Dixie, even to church. The Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi isn't a regular-looking church. The building used to be a Pick It Quick store, and when you walk in the front door, the first thing you see is the Pick It Quick motto. It's written on the floor in little tiny red tiles that made great big letters that say, Pick, 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 quick, quick, quick. The preacher tried painting over those tiles, but the letters won't stay covered up, and so the preacher has just given up and let them be. The other thing about the Open Arms is that is different from other churches, is there aren't any pews. People bring in their old fold-up chairs and lawn chairs, and so sometimes it looks more like the congregation is watching a parade or sitting on a barbecue instead of being a church. It's kind of a strange church, and I thought Winn-Dixie would fit right in. But the first time we brought Winn-Dixie to the Open Arms, the preacher tied him outside the front door. Why did we bring him all the way here just to tie him up? I asked the preacher. Because dogs don't belong in church, Opal, the preacher said. That's why. He tied Winn-Dixie up to a tree and said how there was a lot of shade for him and that it ought to work out real good. Well, it didn't. The service started and there was some singing and some sharing and some praying. And then the preacher started preaching. And he wasn't but 2 or 3 words into his sermon when there was a terrible howl coming from outside. The preacher tried to ignore it. Today, he said. "Oh," said Winn-Dixie. Please, said the preacher. "Oh," said Winn-Dixie back. Friends, said the preacher. "Oh," wailed Winn-Dixie. Everyone turned in their lawn chairs and fold-up chairs and looked at one another. Opal, said the preacher. Ow, said Winn-Dixie. Yes, sir, I said. Go get that dog, he yelled. Yes, sir, I yelled back. I went outside and untied Winn-Dixie and brought him inside, and he sat down beside me and smiled up at the preacher, and the preacher couldn't help it. He smiled back. Winn-Dixie had that effect on him. And so the preacher started in preaching again. Winn-Dixie sat there listening to it, wiggling his ears this way and that, trying to catch all the words. And everything would have been all right, except that a mouse ran across the floor. The open arms had mice. They were there from when it was a Picket Quick, and there were lots of good things to eat in the building. And when the Picket Quick became the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, the mice stayed around to eat all the leftover crumbs from the potluck suppers. The preacher kept on saying he was going to have to do something about them, but he never did. Because the truth is, he couldn't stand the thought of hurting anything, even a mouse. Well, Winn-Dixie saw that mouse, and he was up and after him. One minute everything was quiet and serious, and the preacher was going on and on and on. And the next minute, Winn-Dixie looked like a furry bullet, shooting across the building, chasing that mouse. He was barking, and his feet were skidding all over the polished Picket Quick floor, and people were clapping and hollering and pointing. They really went wild when Winn-Dixie actually caught that mouse. I have never in my life seen a dog catch a mouse, said Mrs. Nordley. She was sitting next to me. He's a special dog, I told her. I imagine so, she said back. Winn-Dixie stood up there in front of the whole church, wagging his tail and holding the mouse real careful in his mouth, holding on to him tight but not squishing him. I believe that bud has got some retriever in him, said somebody behind me. That's a hunting dog. Winn-Dixie took the mouse over to the preacher and dropped it at his feet, and when the mouse tried to get away, Winn-Dixie put his paw right on the mouse's tail. He then smiled up at the preacher. He showed all his teeth. The preacher looked down at the mouse. He looked at Winn-Dixie. He looked at me. He rubbed his nose. It got real quiet in the Picket Quick. Let us pray, the preacher finally said, for this mouse. And everybody started laughing and clapping. The preacher picked up the mouse by the tail and walked it and threw it out the front door of the Picket Quick, and everybody applauded again. Then he came back and we all prayed together. I prayed for my mama. I told God how much she would have enjoyed hearing the story of Winn-Dixie catching that mouse. It would have made her laugh. I asked God if maybe I could be the one to tell her that story someday. And then I talked to God about how I was lonely in Naomi because I didn't know that many kids, only the ones from the church. And there aren't that many kids at the Open Arms. Just Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry, two brothers who were twins but looked like they were. And Amanda Wilkinson, whose face was always pinched up like she was smelling something real bad. And Sweetie Pie Thomas, who was only 5 years old and still mostly a baby. And none of them wanted to be my friend anyway, because they probably thought I'd tell on them to the preacher for every little thing they did wrong, and then they would get in trouble with God and their parents. So I told God that I was lonely, even having Winn-Dixie. And finally I prayed for the mouse, like the preacher suggested. I prayed that he didn't get hurt when he went flying out the door of the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. I prayed that he landed on a nice soft patch of grass. Chapter 6. I spent a lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little old house full of books, and Miss Franny Block is in charge of them all. She is a very small, very old woman with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started with Winn-Dixie not liking it when I went back to the library, because he couldn't go inside too. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look in the window and see me in there, selecting my books. And he was okay, as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn-Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden, there was this loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block, sitting on the floor behind her desk. "Miss Franny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear," she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He has come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn-Dixie, standing up on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. "Miss Franny Block," I said, "that's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog. Winn-Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "I'm positive. He is my dog. I would know him from anywhere." Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said. "Let me help you up. It's okay." I stuck out my hand and Miss Franny took hold of it, and I pulled her up off the floor. She couldn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady, mistaking the dog for a bear, but that she had a bad experience with a bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she never had quite gotten over it. "When did that happen?" I asked her. "Well," said Franny, "it is a very long story." "That's okay," I told her. "I am like my mama in that I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn-Dixie come in and listen too? He gets lonely without me." "I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs are not allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "He's good. He'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn-Dixie, and he came running. He came in and lay down with a humph and a sigh, right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, "He most certainly is a large dog." "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "He has a large heart too." "Well," said Miss Franny said. She bent over and gave Winn-Dixie a pat on the head, and Winn-Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffled his nose on her little old lady feet. "Let me get a chair and sit down, and so I can tell this story properly." Just make it right in. I always check to make sure no comments came along while I'm reading. Chapter 7. Back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big they could fly away with you, Miss Franny started in. "And I was just a little girl, no bigger than your father, Herman W. Block, told me that. I could have anything I wanted for my birthday. Anything at all." Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in close to me. "I don't want to appear prideful," she said, "but my daddy was a very rich man. A very rich man." She nodded and then uh, or wait, and then leaned back and said, "And I was a little girl who loved to read. So I told him. I said, 'Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be nice.'" "You asked for a whole library?" "A small one," Miss Franny nodded. "I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we are sitting in now, and at a very young age. I became a librarian. Yes, ma'am." "What about the bear?" I said. "Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days?" Miss Franny Block said. "Uh-huh, you did. It was wild. There were some wild men and wild women and wild animals. Like bears." "Yes, ma'am. That's right. Now I have to tell you, I was a little miss know-it-all. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my library full of books. Oh, yes, ma'am. I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday, I was running in my library with all the doors and windows open and the door closed to the book. When a shadow crossed the desk, and without looking up, yes, ma'am, without even looking up, I said, I said, is there a book I can help you find? Well, there was no answer, and I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman. Scared of all these books and afraid to speak up, but one that I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. How big? I asked. Oh well, said Miss Franny. Perhaps they're 3 times the size of your dog. Then what happened? I asked her. Well, said Miss Franny, I don't think there's him in. Wait, hold on. Well, said Miss Franny, I looked at him and he looked at me. He put his bag on his nose up in the up in the air and sniffed as if he was trying to decide if a little Miss Know-It-all Libertarian was what he sees. Uh, it's in the woods. Oh, let me see here. Hmm. Let's see here. Let's see here. What book was that? I asked. Why was War and Peace? A very large book. I raised it up slowly, and then I read it carefully. And I threw it right at that other baby and screamed. Be grateful. You know what? No, ma'am, I said. He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. Nuh-uh, I said. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Rennie. He snatched he snatched up, he snatched up, hold on, eh, alright, hold on 1 second, I'm gonna get me a drink of tea. My tea is gonna be right here, over here, don't worry about it, I'm not gonna go too far for it. Alright, wait a minute. Hmm. Hold on, let me, do something real quick, I'll be right back. I got my place on my bookmarker. I'll be right back, guys. Don't worry, it won't be too long. Just give me 1 second here. Oh, I just realized I need to shut my door. Sorry. Okay, I have returned. We're going back into this book. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to start over at the beginning of the page, just so that way we all know where I was at. Oh, well, said Miss Franny. Perhaps 3 times the size of your dog. Then what happened? I asked her. Well, said Miss Franny, I looked at him and he looked at me. He put his big nose up in the air and sniffed as if he were trying to decide if a little Miss Know-it-all librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there, and then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I am not going to let it happen without a fight. No, ma'am. So very slowly and very carefully, I raised up the book I was reading. What book was that? I asked. Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book. I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully, and I threw it right at the bear and screamed, "Begone!" And you know what? No, ma'am, I said. He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. Nuh-uh, I said. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Franny. He snatched it up and ran. Did he come back? I asked. No, I never saw him again. Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They used to say, Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book and said it was so good and would it be all right if he kept it for just another week? Yes, ma'am, they did tease me about it. She sighed. I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine I'm the only one that even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they are all dead and gone. She sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me. I sighed too. Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. He sat up and then showed Miss Franny his teeth. Well now, look at that, she said. That dog is smiling at me. It's a talent of his, I told her. It is a fine talent, Miss Franny said. A very fine talent. And then she smiled back at Winn-Dixie. We could be friends, I said to Miss Franny. I mean, you and me and Winn-Dixie, we could all be friends. Miss Franny smiled even bigger. Why, that would be grand, she said. Just grand. And right at that minute, right when the three of us had decided to be friends, who should come marching into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library but old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, I finished Johnny Tremaine and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read now because I am an advanced reader. Yes, dear, I know, said Miss Franny. She got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't there. She stared right past me. Are dogs allowed in the library? She asked Miss Franny as they walked away. Certain ones, said Miss Franny. A select few. Then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me. Not even old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. Chapter 8. Actually, I do this all the time. Make sure to see if anybody chatted, and if so, I respond to them. If I don't see your comment when you enter it, it's likely because I'm reading the book, and I may not see it when it first pops up. Chapter 8. Wow, already an hour into this. Okay. Chapter 8. Winn-Dixie's bald spots started growing fur, and the fur that he had to begin with started looking shiny and healthy, and he didn't limp anymore. And you could tell that he was proud of looking so good, proud of not looking like a stray. I thought what he needed most was a collar and a leash, and so I went into Gertrude's Pets, where there were fish and snakes and mice and lizards and gerbils and pet supplies, and I found a real handsome red leather collar with a matching leash. Winn-Dixie was not allowed to come inside the store. There was a big sign on the door that said no dogs allowed, so I held the collar and the leash up to the window. And Winn-Dixie, who was standing on the other side of the window, pulled up his lip and showed me his teeth and sneezed and wagged his tail, something furious. So I knew he absolutely loved that leash and that color combination. But it was very expensive. I decided to explain my situation to the man behind the counter. I said, I don't get a big enough allowance to afford something this fancy, but I love this color and leash and so does my dog. And I was thinking that maybe you could set me up on an installment plan. Installment plan? Said the man. Gertrude! Somebody screamed in a real irritated voice. I looked around. It was a parrot. She was sitting on top of one of the fish tanks looking right at me. An installment plan, I said, ignoring the parrot. You know, where I promised to give you my allowance every week and you give me the leash and the color now. I don't think I can do that, said the man. He shook his head. No, the owner, she wouldn't like that. He looked down at the counter. He wouldn't look at me. He had thick black hair and it was slicked back like Elvis Presley's. He had on a name tag that said Otis. Or I could work for you, I said. I could come in and sweep the floors and dust the shelves and take out the trash. I could do that. I looked around Gertrude's Pets. There was sand and sunflower seed shells and a big dust bunnies all over the floor. I could tell that it needed to be swept. Uh, said Otis. He looked down at the counter some more. Gertrude! Gertrude! Hold on. Gertrude! The parrot screamed again. I'm real trustworthy, I said. I'm new in town, but my daddy is a preacher. He is the preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, so I'm real honest. But the thing is, Winn-Dixie, my dog, he would have to come inside with me, because if we get separated for too long, he starts to howl something terrible. Gertrude doesn't like dogs, said Otis. Is she the owner? I asked. Yes. No. I mean, he finally looked up. He pointed at the fish tank. That, Gertrude. The parrot. I named her after the owner. Gertrude's a pretty bird, screamed Gertrude. She might like Winn-Dixie, I told Otis. Almost everybody does. Maybe he could come inside and meet her, and if the two of them get along, then could I have the job? Maybe, Otis mumbled. He looked down at the counter again. So I went and opened the door, and Winn-Dixie came trotting on inside the store. Dog! Screamed Gertrude. I know it, Otis told her. And then Gertrude got real quiet. She sat on the top of the fish tank and cocked her head from one side to the other, looking at Winn-Dixie. And Winn-Dixie looked and stood and stared back at her. He didn't hardly move. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't smile. He didn't sneeze. He just stared at Gertrude and she stared at him. And then she spread her wings out real far and flew and landed on top of Winn-Dixie's head. Dog! She croaked. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail just a little tiny bit. And Otis said, You can start on Monday. Thank you, I told him. You won't be sorry. On the way out of Gertrude's Pets, I said to Winn-Dixie, You're better making friends than anybody I have ever known. I bet if my mama knew you, she would think you were the best dog ever. Winn-Dixie was smiling up at me, and I was smiling down at him. And so neither one of us was looking where we were going, and we almost bumped right into Sweetie Pie Thomas. She was standing there, sucking on the knuckle of her third finger, staring in the window of Gertrude's Pets. She took her finger out of her mouth and looked at me. Her eyes were all big and round. Was that little bird sitting on that dog's head? She asked. She had her hair tied up in a ponytail with a pink ribbon. But it wasn't much of a ponytail. It was mostly ribbon and a few strands of hair. Yes, I told her. I seen it, she said. She nodded her head and put her knuckle back in her mouth. Then she took it out again real quick. I seen that dog in church, too. He was catching a mouse. I want a dog just like it, but my mama won't let me get no dog. She says if I'm real good, I might get to buy me a goldfish or one of them gerbils. That's what she says. Can I pet your dog? Sure, I told her. Sweetie Pie stroked Winn-Dixie's head so long and serious that his eyes drooped half closed, and drool came out of the side of his mouth. I'm going to be 6 years old in September. I gotta stop sucking on my knuckle once I'm 6, said Sweetie Pie. I'm having a party. Do you want to come to my party? The theme is pink. Sure, I told her. Can this dog come? She asked. You bet, I told her. And all of a sudden I felt happy. I had a dog, I had a job, I had Miss Franny Block for a friend, and I had my first invitation to a party in Naomi. It didn't matter that I came from a 5-year-old and the party wasn't until September. I didn't feel so lonely anymore. Yeah, it's something that can happen when you move to a new place. You're gonna feel lonely, and some people don't like it. Like at first, it's gonna feel lonely, but as long as you put more positive attention to yourself and not seem like you're trying to be a know-it-all or a show-off, you can actually still make friends in your new hometown. I mean, if I remember correctly, when I first started doing these book reading live streams, one of my first few books was Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul, and there was a story in it that involved a person talking about their experiences of dealing with moving from one area to another, and how at first she didn't like it and she didn't want to get to know anybody because in her mind, as soon as she could, she was going to move right back to where she moved away. She was going to go right back over there. But then as time goes on, uh, she slowly starts to forget about her hometown. Like she doesn't like forget, like as in like it just completely left her mind. But she is now, but as time went on, she was being more open toward this new area because she was getting used to it. But the memory of her past, of her friends, and her life in her past hometown, in her past, she will never forget them. But she is making new memories and new friends in this new town that she moved into. So yeah, that's what I remember, and I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and as far as I know, that reading stream is still up. If anybody wants to watch that one, it's all up to you guys. I don't tell you guys to do it. It's up to you to do it if you want to or not. Chapter 9. Just about everything that happened to me that summer happened because of Winn-Dixie. For instance, without him, I would never have met Gloria Dunlap. He was the one who introduced us. What happened was this. I was riding my bike home from Gertrude's Pets, and Winn-Dixie was running along beside me. We went past Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry's house, and when Dunlap and Stevie saw me, they got on their bikes and started following me. They wouldn't ride with me. They just rode behind me and whispered things that I couldn't hear. Neither of them had any hair on his head because their mama shaved their heads every week during the summer because of the one time Dunlap got fleas in his hair from their cat, Sadie. And now they looked like two identical bald-headed babies, even though they weren't twins. Dunlap was 10 years old, like me, and Stevie was 9 and tall for his age. I can hear you, I hollered back at them. I can hear what you're saying, but I couldn't. Winn-Dixie started to race way ahead of me. You better watch out, Dunlap hollered. That dog was headed right for the witch's house. Winn-Dixie, I called. But he kept on going faster and hopped again and went into the most overgrown jungle of a yard that I have ever seen. You better go get your dog out of there, Dunlap said. The witch will eat that dog, Stevie said. Shut up, I told them. I got off my bike and went up to the gate and hollered, Winn-Dixie, you better come on out of there. But he didn't. She's probably eating him right now, Stevie said. He and Dunlap were standing right behind me, and she eats dogs all the time. Get lost, you bald-headed babies, I said. Hey, said Dunlap. That ain't a very nice thing for a preacher's daughter to talk. He and Stevie backed up a little. I stood there and thought for a minute. I finally decided that I was more afraid of losing Winn-Dixie than I was of having to deal with a dog-eating witch, so I went through the gate and into the yard. That witch is going to eat the dog for dinner and you for dessert, Stevie said. Well, tell the preacher what happened to you, Dunlap shouted after me. By then I was deep in the jungle. There was every kind of thing growing everywhere. There were flowers and vegetables and trees and vine. Winn-Dixie? I said. I heard. This dog sure likes to eat. I went around a really big tree all covered in moss, and there was Winn-Dixie. He was eating something right out of the witch's hand. She looked up at me. This dog sure likes peanut butter, she said. You can always trust a dog that likes peanut butter. She was old with crinkly brown skin. She had on a big floppy hat with flowers all over it, and she didn't have any teeth, but she didn't look like a witch. She looked nice, and Winn-Dixie liked her. I could tell. I'm sorry he got into your garden, I said. You ain't gotta be sorry, she said. I enjoy a little company. My name's Opal, I told her. My name's Gloria Dump, she said. Ain't that a terrible last name? Dump. And if anybody's gonna make fun of her for her last name, don't even. My last name is Bologna, I said. Sometimes the kids at school back home in Wadley called me lunch meat. Ha! Gloria Dump laughed. What about this dog? What do you call him? Winn-Dixie, I said. Winn-Dixie thumped his tail on the ground. He tried smiling, but it was hard with his mouth all full of peanut butter. Winn-Dixie, Gloria Dump said. You mean like the grocery store? Yes, ma'am, I said. Whoo-wee, she said. That takes a strange name prize, don't it? Yes, ma'am, I said. I was just fixing to make myself a peanut butter sandwich, she said. You want one too? All right, I said. Yes, please. Go on and sit down, she said, pointing at a lawn chair with the back all busted out of it. But sit down careful. I sat down careful, and Gloria Dump made me a peanut butter sandwich on white bread. Then she made one for herself and put her false teeth in to eat it. When she was done, she said to me, You know, my eyes ain't too good at all. I can't see nothing but the general shape of things, so I've got to rely on my heart. Why don't you go on and tell me everything about yourself so as I can see you with my heart? And because Winn-Dixie was looking up at her like she was the best thing he had ever seen, and because the peanut butter sandwich had been so good, and because I had been waiting for a long time to tell some person everything about me, I did. Chapter 10. I told Gloria Dump everything. I told her how me and the preacher had just moved to Naomi, and how I had to leave all my friends behind. I told her about my mama leaving, and I listed out the 10 things that I knew about her. And I explained that here in Naomi, I missed Mama more than I ever had in Watley. I told her about the preacher being like a turtle, hiding all of the things all the time inside his shell. I told her about finding Winn-Dixie in the produce department and how because of him, I became friends with Miss Franny Block and got a job. Hold on 1 second. I thought someone was knocking on my door. Moving on. Got a job at working for a man named Otis at Gertrude's Pets, and got invited to Sweetie Pie's Thomas's birthday party. I even told Gloria Dump how Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry called her a witch, but I told her they were stupid, mean, bald-headed boys, and I didn't believe them. Not for long, anyhow. And the whole time I was talking, Gloria Dump was listening. She was nodding her head and smiling and frowning and saying, and said, and, is that right? I could feel her listening with all her heart, and it felt good. You know what? You know what? She said when I was all done. What? Could be that you got more of your mama in you than just red hair and freckles and running fast. Really? I said. Like what? Like maybe you got a green thumb. The two of us could plant something and see how it grows. Test your thumb out. Okay, I said. When Gloria Dunn picked for me to grow was a tree. Or she said it was a tree. To me it looked more like a plant. She had me dig a hole for it and put it in the ground and pat the dirt around it tight, like it was a baby and I was tucking it into bed. What kind of tree is it? I asked Gloria Dump. It's a wait and see tree, she said. What does that mean? It means you gotta wait for it to grow up before you know what it is. Can I come back and see it tomorrow? I asked. Child, she said, as long as this is in my garden, you're welcome to it. But that tree ain't going to have changed much by tomorrow. But I want to see you too, I said. Said Gloria Dump. I ain't going nowhere. I'll be right here. I woke Winn-Dixie up then. He had peanut butter in his whiskers and he kept yawning and stretching. He licked Gloria's Dump's hand before he left, and I thanked her. That night, when the preacher was tucking me into bed, I told him how I got a job at Gertrude's Pets, and I told him all about making friends with Miss Franny Block and getting invited to Sweetie Pie's party, and I told him about meeting Gloria Dump. Winn-Dixie lay on the floor, waiting for the preacher to leave so he could hop up on the bed like he always did. When I was done talking, the preacher kissed me good night, and then he leaned way over and gave Winn-Dixie a kiss too, right on top of his head. You can go ahead and get up there now, he said to Winn-Dixie. Winn-Dixie looked at the preacher. He didn't smile at him, but he opened his mouth wide like he was laughing, like the preacher just told him the funniest joke in the world. And this is what amazed me the most. The preacher laughed back. Winn-Dixie hopped up on the bed, and the preacher got up and turned out the light. I leaned over and kissed Winn-Dixie too, right on the nose, but he didn't notice. He was already asleep and snoring. Yep, I'm always going to be checking the comments, making sure everything's all good here. Chapter 11. That night there was a real bad thunderstorm, but what woke me up wasn't the thunder and lightning. It was Winn-Dixie, whining and butting his head against my bedroom door. Winn-Dixie, I said, what are you doing? He didn't pay any attention to me. He just kept beating his head against the door and whining and whimpering. And when I got out of bed and went over and put my hand on his head, he was shaking and trembling so hard that it scared me. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around him, but he didn't turn back and look at me or smile or sneeze or wag his tail or do any normal kind of Winn-Dixie thing. He just kept beating his head against the door and crying and shaking. You want the door open? I said. Huh? Is that what you want? I stood up and opened the door, and Winn-Dixie flew through it like something big and ugly and mean was chasing him. Winn-Dixie, I hissed. Come back here. I didn't want him going and waking the preacher up. But it was too late. Winn-Dixie was already at the other end of the trailer, in the preacher's room. I could tell because there was a spring sound that must have come from Winn-Dixie jumping on the bed. And then there was a sound from the preacher like he was real surprised. But none of it lasted long because Winn-Dixie turned back out of the preacher's room, panting and running like crazy. I tried to grab him, but he was going too fast. Opal? He said the preacher. He was standing at the door into his bedroom, and his hair was all kind of wild on top of his head, and he was looking around like he wasn't sure where he was. Opal, what's going on? I don't know, I told him. But just then there was a huge crack of thunder, one so loud that it shook the whole trailer, and Winn-Dixie came shooting back out of my room and went running right past me, and I screamed, "Daddy, watch out!" But the preacher was still confused. He just stood there, and Winn-Dixie came barreling right toward him like he was a bowling ball, and the preacher was the only pin left standing, and wham! They both fell to the ground. "Uh-oh," I said. "Opal," said the teacher. He was lying on his stomach, and Winn-Dixie was sitting on top of him, panting and whining. "Yes, sir," I said. "Opal," the preacher said again. "Yes, sir," I said louder. "Do you know what a pathological fear is?" "No, sir," I told him. The preacher raised a hand. He rubbed his nose. "Well," he said after a minute, "it's a fear that goes way beyond normal fears. It's a fear you can't be talked out of or reasoned out of." Just then there was another crack of thunder, and Winn-Dixie rose straight up in the air like somebody had poked him with something hot. When he hit the floor, he started running. He ran back to my bedroom, and I didn't even try to catch him. I just got out of his way. The preacher lay there on the ground, rubbing his nose. Finally, he sat up. He said, "Opal, I believe Winn-Dixie has a pathological fear of thunderstorms." And just when he finished his sentence, here came Winn-Dixie again, running to save his life. I got the preacher up off the floor and out of the way just in time. There didn't seem to be a thing we could do for Winn-Dixie to make him feel better, so we just sat there and watched him run back and forth, all terrorized and panting. And every time there was another crack of thunder, Winn-Dixie acted all over again, like it was surely the end of the world. "The storm won't last long," the preacher told me, "and when it's over, the real Winn-Dixie will come back." After a while, the storm did end. The rain stopped, and there wasn't any more lightning, and finally, the last rumble of thunder went away, and Winn-Dixie quit running back and forth and came over to where me and the preacher were sitting and cocked his head, like he was saying, "What in the world are you two doing out of bed in the middle of the night?" And then he crept up on the couch with us in this funny way he has, where he gets on the couch an inch at a time, kind of sliding himself onto it, looking off in a different direction, like it's all happening by accident, like he doesn't intend to get on the couch, but all of a sudden, there he is. And so the three of us sat there. I rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and scratched him behind the ears the way he liked. And the preacher said, "There are an awful lot of thunderstorms in Florida in the summertime." "Yes, sir," I said. I was afraid that maybe he would say we couldn't keep a dog who went crazy with pathological fear every time there was a crack of thunder. "We'll have to keep an eye on him," the preacher said. He put his arm around Winn-Dixie. "We'll have to make sure he doesn't get out during the storm. He might run away. We have to make sure we keep him safe." "Yes, sir," I said again. All of a sudden it was hard for me to talk. I loved the preacher so much. I loved him because he loved Winn-Dixie. I loved him because he was going to forgive Winn-Dixie for being afraid. But most of all, I loved him for putting his arm around Winn-Dixie like that, like he was already trying to keep him safe. So now, if my memory is serving me correctly, we are almost halfway through the book, because there are 26 chapters in this book, and we're on chapter 12. So, yeah. Gonna take a quick look. Nothing in the chat yet at all right now, but who knows. Okay, that wasn't a bug. Even if it was a bug, it was actually on the outside of the glass, not inside of it. That's actually kind of good. Anyway, chapter 12. Me and Winn-Dixie got to Gertrude's Pet so early for my first day of work that the closed sign was still in the window. but when I pushed the door open, it swung open, and so he went on inside. I was about to call out to Otis that we were there, but then I heard music. It was the prettiest music I have ever heard in my life. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and that's when I noticed that all the animals were out of their cages. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes. Yeah?
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Family member. Alright, moving back to this book here. Now, she was talking about how all the animals were, how she spotted all the animals. We just didn't really say what they were doing. So we're going to go ahead and go back to that part, to the sentence that we were on. There were rabbits and hamsters and gerbils and mice and birds and lizards and snakes, and they were all just sitting there on the floor like they had turned to stone, and Otis was standing in the middle of them. He was playing a guitar and he had on skinny pointy-toed cowboy boots, and he was tapping them while he was playing the music. His eyes were closed and he was smiling. Winn-Dixie got a dreamy kind of look on his face. He smiled really hard at Otis, and then he squeezed and he sneezed, and then his whiskers were all fuzzy, and then he sighed and kind of dropped to the floor with all the other animals. Just then Gertrude caught sight of Winn-Dixie. "Dog!" she croaked, and flew over and landed on his head. Otis looked up at me. He started playing his guitar, and the spell was broken. The rabbits started hopping, and the birds started flying, and the lizards started leaping, and the snakes started slithering, and Winn-Dixie started barking and chasing everything that was moving. And Otis shouted, "Help me!" For what seemed like a long time, me and Otis ran around trying to catch mice and gerbils and hamsters and snakes and lizards. We kept on bumping into each other and tripping over the animals, and Gertrude kept screaming, "Dog! Dog!" Every time I caught something, I put it back on the first cage I saw. I didn't care if it was the right cage or not. I just put it in and slammed the door. And the whole time I was chasing things, I was thinking that Otis may be some kind of snake charmer, the way he could play his guitar and make all the animals turn to stone. And then I thought, "This is silly," I shouted over Winn-Dixie barking and Gertrude yelling. I said, "Play some more music, Otis." He looked at me for a minute. Then he started playing his guitar, and in just a few seconds, everything was quiet. Winn-Dixie was lying on the floor, blinking his eyes and smiling to himself and sneezing every now and then, and the mice and the gerbils and the rabbits and the lizards and the snakes that we hadn't caught yet got quiet and sat still, and I picked them up one by one and put them back in their cages. When I was all done, Otis stopped playing. He looked down at his boots. "I was just playing them some music. It makes them happy." "Yes, sir," I said. "Did they escape from their cages?" "No," Otis said. "I take them out. I feel sorry for them being locked up all the time. I know what it's like, being locked up." "You do?" I said. "I have been in jail," Otis said. He looked at me real quick and then looked back down at his boots. "You have?" I said. "Never mind," said Otis. "Aren't you here to sweep the floor?" "Yes, sir," I told him. He walked over to the counter and started digging through a pile of things, and finally he came up with a broom. "Here," he said, "you should start sweeping." Only he must have gotten confused. He was holding out his guitar to me instead of the broom. With your guitar? I asked. He blushed and handed me the broom, and I started to work. I am a good sweeper. I swept the whole store and then dusted some of the shelves. The whole time I worked, Winn-Dixie followed me, and Gertrude followed him, flying behind him and sitting on his head and his back and croaking real quiet to herself. Dog, dog. When I was done, Otis thanked me. I left Gertrude's pets thinking about how the preacher probably wouldn't like it very much that I was working for a criminal. Sweetie Pie Thomas was waiting for me right out front. I seen that, she said. She stood there and sucked on her knuckle and stared at me. Seen what? Seen what? I said. I said all them animals out of their cages and keeping real still. Is that man magic? She asked. Kind of, I told her. She hugged Winn-Dixie around the neck. Just like this grocery store dog, right? Right, I said. I started walking and Sweetie Pie took her knuckle out of her mouth and put her hand in mine. Are you coming to my birthday party? She asked. I surely am, I told her. The theme is pink, she said. I know it, I told her. I gotta go, she said all of a sudden. I gotta go home and tell my mama about what I seen. I live right down there, in that yellow house. That's my mama on the porch. You see her? She's waving at you. I waved at the woman on the porch and she waved back, and I watched Sweetie Pie run off to tell her mama about Otis being a magic man. It made me think about my mama and how I wanted to tell her the story about Otis charming all the animals. I was collecting stories for her. I would also tell her about Miss Franny and the bear, and about meeting Gloria Dump and believing for just a minute that she was a witch. I had a feeling that these were the kind of stories my mama would like, the kind that would make her laugh out loud, the way the preacher said she liked to laugh. Chapter 13. Me and Winn-Dixie got into a daily routine where we would leave the trailer early in the morning and get down to Gertrude's place in time to hear Otis play his guitar music for the animals. Sometimes Sweetie Pie snuck in for the concert, too. She sat on the floor and wrapped her arms around Winn-Dixie and rocked him back and forth like he was a big old teddy bear. And then when the music was over, she would walk around trying to pick out which pet she wanted, but she always gave up and went home because the only thing she really wanted was a dog like Winn-Dixie. After she was gone, I would sweep and clean up and even arrange some of Otis's shelves, because he did not have an eye for arranging things, and I did. And when I was done, Otis would write down my time in a notebook that he had marked on the outside. 1 red leather collar, 1 red leather leash. And the whole time he did not in any way ever act like a criminal. After working at Gertrude's Pets, me and Winn-Dixie would go over to the Herman W. Block Memorial Library and talk to Miss Franny Block and listen to her tell us a story. But my favorite place to be that summer was in Gloria Dump's yard. And I figured it was Winn-Dixie's favorite place too, because when we got up to the last block before her house, Winn-Dixie would break away from my bike and start to run for all he was worth, heading for Gloria Dump's backyard and his spoonful of peanut butter. Sometimes Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry would follow me. They would holler, "There goes the preacher's daughter, visiting the witch." "She's not a witch," I told them. It made me mad the way they wouldn't listen to me and kept on believing whatever they wanted to believe about Gloria Dump. One time Stevie said to me, "My mama said you shouldn't be spending all your time cooped up in that pet shop in that library, sitting around talking with old ladies. She said you should get out in the fresh air and play with kids your own age. That's what my mama says." "Oh, lay off her. Oh, lay off her," Dunlap said to Stevie. Then he turned to me. "He don't mean it," he said. But I was already mad. I shouted at Stevie. I said, "I don't care what your mama says. She's not my mama, so she can't tell me what to do." "I'm going to tell my mama you said that," shouted Stevie. "And she'll tell your daddy, and he'll shame you in front of the whole church. And that pet shop and that pet shop man is retarded, and he was in jail, and I wonder if your daddy knows that." Otis is not retarded, I said. And my daddy knows that he was in jail. That was a lie, but I didn't care. And you can go ahead and tell on me if you want, you big bald-headed baby. Damn. Opal having a lot in her to defend the people she cares about. I swear, it about wore me out yelling at Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry every day. By the time I got to Gloria Dumpsyard, I felt like a soldier who had been fighting a hard battle. Gloria would make me a peanut butter sandwich straight off, and then she would pour me a cup of coffee, with half coffee and half milk, and that would refresh me. You know, the funny part is, I actually remember recently a person in at my workplace when I was on the clock. Somebody bought me a can of this monster mean bean this this like this monster energy drink that was like a coffee sort of flavor, and it to me it tasted like chocolate milk mixed with coffee. Uh, it's like I didn't like the taste, like the taste that you get when you first when you first drink it, but then the aftertaste was what I liked the most about it. If I'm being honest with it. Why don't you play with them boys? Gloria asked me. Because they're ignorant, I told her. They still think you're a witch. It doesn't matter how many times I tell them you're not. I think they're just trying to make friends with you in a roundabout way, Gloria said. I don't want to be their friend, I said. It might be fun having them two boys for friends. I'd rather talk to you, I said. They're stupid and mean, and they're boys. Gloria would shake her head and sigh, and then she would ask me what was going on in the world, and did I have any stories to tell her. And I always did. Chapter 14. Sometimes I told Gloria the story Miss Franny Block had just told me, or I imitated Otis tapping his pointy-toed boots and playing for all the animals, and that would always make her laugh. And sometimes I made up a story and Gloria Dump would listen to it all the way through from beginning to end. She told me she used to love to read stories, but she couldn't anymore because her eyes were so bad. Can't you get some really strong glasses? I asked her. Child, she said, they don't make glasses strong enough for these eyes. One day, when the storytelling was done, I decided to tell Gloria that Otis was a criminal. I thought maybe I should tell an adult about it, and Gloria was the best adult I knew. Gloria? I said. Mm-hmm, she said back. You know Otis? I don't know him, but I know what you tell me about him. Well, he is a criminal. He's been in jail. Do you think I should be afraid of him? What for? I don't know. For doing bad things, I guess. For being in jail. Child, said Gloria, let me show you something. She got up out of her chair real slow and took hold of my arm. Let's the two of us walk all the way to the back of this yard. Okay, I said. We walked and Winn-Dixie followed right behind us. It was a huge yard and I had never been all the way back in it. When we got to a big old tree, we stopped. Look at this tree, Gloria said. I looked up. There were bottles hanging from just about every branch. There were whiskey bottles and beer bottles and wine bottles all tied on with string, and some of them were clanking against each other and making a spooky kind of noise. Me and Winn-Dixie stood and stared at the tree, and the hair on the top of his head rose up a little bit, and he growled deep in his throat. Gloria Dunn pointed her cane at the tree. What do you think about this tree? I said, I don't know. Why are all those bottles on it? To keep the ghosts away, Gloria said. What ghosts? The ghosts of all the things I done wrong. I looked at the bottles on the tree. You did that many things wrong? I asked her. Mm-hmm, said Gloria. More than that. But you're the nicest person I know, I told her. Don't mean I haven't done bad things, she said. There's whiskey bottles on there, I told her. And beer bottles. Child, said Gloria. I know that. I'm the one who put 'em there. I'm the one who drank what was in 'em. My mama drank, I whispered. I know it, Gloria Dumb said. The preacher says that sometimes she couldn't stop drinking. Mm-hmm, said Gloria again. That's the way it is for some folks. We get started and we can't stop. And we can't get stopped. Are you one of those people? Yes, ma'am, I am. But these days I don't drink nothing stronger than coffee. Did the whiskey and beer and wine, did they make you do the bad things that are ghosts now? Some of them, said Gloria Dumb. Some of them I would have done anyway, with alcohol or without it, before I learned. Learned what? Learned what is the most important thing. What's that? I asked her. It's different for everyone, she said. You find out on your own. But in the meantime, you gotta remember, you can't always judge people by the things they done. You gotta judge them by what they are doing now. You judge Otis by the pretty music he plays and how kind he is to them animals, because that's all you know about him right now. All right? Yes, ma'am, I said. And them Dewberry boys, you try not to judge them too harsh either, all right? All right, I said. All right then, said Gloria Dump, and she turned and started walking away. Winn-Dixie nudged me with his wet nose and wagged his tail. When he saw I wasn't going, he trotted out to Gloria. I stayed where I was and studied the tree. I wondered if my mama, wherever she was, had a tree full of bottles, and I wondered if I was a ghost to her, the same way she sometimes seemed like a ghost to me. Hmm. I could probably read this book in one sitting at this point. Yeah, we're almost. It's literally an hour and a half, and I'm past the halfway mark. So who knows how fast this book reading will be. And don't forget, I did say I have this other book that was on my list of books to read, which I literally just pulled out today because I got done reading one of the books that I will be putting in the poll for the upcoming book reading that you guys want me to do. Like which book you guys want me to read next. That book is going to be involved in it, and then I pulled this book out which is in the hand that's obviously raised. And if I get done with this book, uh, fast enough, I may actually just read this book too. That's why I said possibly another book because I don't know if I'm going to be able to read that book or not. Anyway, chapter 15. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library's air conditioning unit didn't work very good, and there was only one fan, and from the minute me and Winn-Dixie got in the library, he hogged it all. He lay right in front of it and wagged his tail and let it blow his fur all around. Some of his fur was pretty loose and blew right off of him, just like a dandelion puff. I worried about him hogging the fan, and I worried about the fan blowing him bald. But Miss Franny said not to worry about either thing. The Winn-Dixie could hog the fan if he wanted, and she had never in her life seen a dog made bald by a fan. Sometimes when Miss Franny was telling a story, she would have a fit. They were small fits, and they didn't last long. But what happened was she would forget what she was saying. She would just stop and start to shake like a little leaf. And when that happened, Winn-Dixie would get up from the fan and sit right next to Miss Randy Block's side. He would sit up tall, protecting her, with his ears standing up straight on his head, like soldiers. And when Miss Franny stopped shaking and started talking again, Winn-Dixie would lick her hand and lie back down in front of the fan. Whenever Miss Franny had one of her fits, it reminded me of Winn-Dixie in a thunderstorm. There were a lot of thunderstorms that summer. and I got real good at holding on to Winn-Dixie whenever they came. I held on to him and comforted him and whispered to him and rocked him, just the same way he tried to comfort Miss Franny when she had her fits. Only I held on to Winn-Dixie for another reason, too. I held on to him tight so he wouldn't run away. It all made me think about Gloria Dump. I wondered who comforted her when she heard those bottles knocking together, those ghosts chattering about the things she has done wrong. I wanted to comfort Gloria Dump, and I decided that the best way to do that would be to read her a book, read it to her loud enough to keep the ghosts away. And so I asked Miss Franny. I said, Miss Franny, I've got a grown-up friend whose eyes are going on her, and I would like to read her a book out loud. Do you have any suggestions? Suggestions? Miss Franny said. Yes, ma'am. I have suggestions. Of course I have suggestions. How about David Copperfield? Who's he? I asked her. David Copperfield is the title of the book, Opal, said Miss Franny. Oh, well, what's it about? It's about a boy growing up. It's been a tradition in my family to read the book aloud. My great-grandfather Litmus read the book aloud to my grandfather every year, and when my father was an old man, I read it aloud to him. It sure must be a good book, I said. Why, that book mattered so much to Litmus that he even took a copy of it with him when he went off to fight in the Civil War. He was just a boy, you know. Litmus was your great-grandfather? Oh, yes, ma'am. Litmus W. Block. Now there's a story. Winn-Dixie yawned real big and lay down on his side with a thump and a sigh. I swear he knew that phrase. Now there's a story. And he knew it meant we weren't going anywhere real soon. Go ahead and tell it to me, Miss Franny, I said, and I sat down cross-legged next to Winn-Dixie. I pushed him and tried to get him to share the fan, but he pretended he was asleep, and he wouldn't move. I was all settled in and ready for a good story when the door banged and pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson came in. Winn-Dixie sat up and stared at her. He tried not to smile on her, but she didn't smile back, and so he lay down again. I'm ready for another book, Amanda said, slamming her book down on Miss Franny's desk. Well, said Miss Franny, maybe you wouldn't mind waiting. I'm telling India Opal about a story about my great-grandfather. You are, of course, more than welcome to listen. It will just be 1 minute. Amanda sighed a real big dramatic sigh and stared past me. She pretended like she wasn't interested, but she was. I could tell. Come sit over here, said Miss Franny. I'll stand, thank you, said Amanda. Suit yourself, Miss Franny shrugged. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, Litmus. Litmus W. Block. Chapter 16. Litmus W. Block was just a boy when the firing on Fort Sumter occurred, Miss Franny Block said as she started in on her story. Fort Sumter? I said. It was the firing on Fort Sumter that started the war, said Amanda. Okay, I said. I shrugged. Well, Litmus was 14 years old. He was strong and big, but he was still just a boy. His daddy, Artley W. Block, had already enlisted, and Litmus told his mama that he could not stand by and let the South get beat, and so he went to fight, too. Miss Franny looked around the library, and then she whispered, Men and boys always want to fight. They're always looking for a reason to go to war. It is the saddest thing. They have this abiding notion that war is fun, and no history lesson will convince them differently. Anyway, Litmus went and enlisted. He lied about his age. Yes, ma'am. Like I said, he was a big boy, and the army took him, and Litmus went off to war just like that. Left behind his mother and 3 sisters. He went off to be a hero. But he soon found out the truth. Miss Franny closed her eyes and shook her head. What truth? I asked her. Why, that war is hell, Miss Franny said with her eyes still closed. Pure hell. Hell is a cuss word, said Amanda. I stole a look at her. Her nose was pinched up even more than usual. War, said Miss Franny with her eyes still closed, should be a cuss word too. She shook her head and opened her eyes. She pointed at me and then she pointed at Amanda. You, neither of you, can imagine. No, ma'am, said Amanda and me said at exactly the same time. We looked real quick at each other and then back at Miss Franny. You cannot imagine. Litmus was hungry all the time, and he was covered with all manner of vermin, fleas and lice. And in the winter he was so cold he thought for sure he would freeze to death. And in the summer, why, there's nothing worse than war in the summertime. It stinks so. And the only thing that made Litmus forget that he was hungry and itchy and hot or cold was that he was getting shot at. And he got shot at quite a bit. And he was nothing more than a child. Did he get killed? I asked Miss Franny. Good grief, said Amanda. She rolled her eyes. Now Opal, Miss Franny said, I wouldn't be standing in this room telling this story if he was killed. I wouldn't exist. No, ma'am. He had to live. But he was a changed man. Yes, ma'am. A changed man. He walked back home when the war was over. He walked from Virginia all the way back to Georgia. He didn't have a horse. Nobody had a horse except for the Yankees. He walked, and when he got home, there was no home there. Where was it? I asked her. I didn't care if Amanda thought I was stupid. I wanted to know. Why? Miss Franny shouted so loud that Winn-Dixie and Amanda Wilkinson and me all jumped. The Yankees burned it! Yes, ma'am. Burned it to the ground. What about his sisters? Amanda asked. She moved around the desk and came and sat on the floor. She looked up at Miss Franny. What happened to them? Dead. Dead of typhoid fever. Oh no, Amanda said in a real soft voice. And his mama? I whispered. Dead too. And his father? Amanda asked. What happened to him? He died on the battlefield. Litmus was an orphan? I asked. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Franny Block. Litmus was an orphan. This is a sad story, I told Miss Franny. It sure is, said Amanda. I was amazed that she was agreeing with me about something. I am not done yet, Miss Franny said. Winn-Dixie started to snore, and I nudged him with my foot to try to make him quit. I wanted to hear the rest of the story. It was important to me to hear how Litmus survived after losing everything he loved. Chapter 17. Well, Litmus came home from the war, said Miss Franny as she went on with her story, and found him alone. And he sat down on what used to be the front step of his house, and he cried and cried. He just cried like a baby. Cried just like a baby. He missed his mama, and he missed his daddy, and he missed his sisters, and he missed the boy he used to be. When he finally finished crying, he had the strangest sensation. He felt like he wanted something sweet. He wanted a piece of candy. He hadn't had a piece of candy in years. And it was right then that he made a decision. Yes, ma'am. Litmus W. Block figured the world was a sorry affair, and that it had enough ugly things in it, and what he was going to do was concentrate on putting something sweet in it. He got up and started walking. He walked all the way to Florida, and the whole time he was walking, he was planning. Planning what? I asked. Why, planning the candy factory. Did he build it? Of course he did. It's still standing out on Fairville Road. That old building? Said Amanda. That big spooky one? It is not spooky, said Miss Franny. It was the birthplace of the family fortune. It was there that my great-grandfather manufactured the litmus lozenge, a candy that was famous the world over. I've never heard of it, said Amanda. Me neither, I said. Well, said Miss Franny, they aren't made anymore. The world, it seems, lost its appetite for litmus lozenges, but I still happen to carry a few. She opened the top drawer of her desk. It was full of candy. She opened the drawer below that. It was full of candy, too. Miss Franny Block's whole desk was full of candy. Would you care for a litmus lozenge? She asked Amanda and me. Yes, please, said Amanda. Sure, I said. Can Winn-Dixie have one, too? I've never known a dog that cared for hard candy, said Miss Franny. But he is welcome to try one. Miss Franny gave Amanda one litmus lozenge and me, too. I unwrapped one and held it out held it out to Winn-Dixie. He sat up and sniffed it and wagged his tail and took the candy from between my fingers real gentle. He tried to chew on it, and when that didn't work, he just swallowed the whole thing in one big gulp. Then he wagged his tail at me and lay back down. I ate my litmus lozenge slow. It tasted good. It tasted like root beer and strawberry and something else I didn't have a name for. Something that made me feel kind of sad. I looked over at Amanda. She was sucking on her candy and thinking hard. Do you like it? Miss Reddy asked me. Yes, ma'am, I told her. What about you, Amanda? Do you like the litmus lozenge? Yes, ma'am, she said. But it makes me think of things I feel sad about. I wonder what in the world Amanda Wilkinson had to feel sorry about. She wasn't new to town. She had a mama and a daddy. I had seen her with them in church. There's a secret ingredient in there, Miss Franny said. I know it, I told her. I can taste it. What is it? Sorrow, Miss Franny said. Not everybody can taste it. Children, especially, seem to have a hard time knowing it's there. I taste it, I said. Me too, said Amanda. Well then, Miss Franny said, you probably both had your share of sadness. I had to move away from Wadley and leave all my friends. I, uh, I had to move away from Watley and leave all my friends, I said. That is one sadness I have had. And Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry are always picking on me. That's another sadness. And the biggest one, my biggest sadness, is that my mama left me when I was still small, and I can hardly remember her. I keep hoping I'll get to meet her and tell her some stories. It makes me miss Carson, said Amanda. She sounded like she was going to cry. I have to go. And she got up and almost ran out of the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. Who's Carson? I asked Miss Franny. She shook her head. Sorrow, she said. It is a sorrow-filled world. But how do you put that into a piece of candy? I asked her. How do you get that taste in there? That's the secret, she said. That's why Litmus made a fortune. He manufactured a piece of candy that tasted sweet and sad at the same time. Can I have a piece to take to my friend Gloria Dump, and another one to take to Otis down at the Gertrude's Pets, and one for the preacher, and one for Sweetie Pie too? You may have as many as you want, said Miss Franny. So I stuffed my pockets full of litmus lozenges, and I thanked Miss Franny for her story, and I checked out David Copperfield, which was a very big book, and I told Winn-Dixie to get up, and the two of us left and went over to Gloria Dump's. I rode right past the Dewberry's house. Dunlap and Stevie were playing football in the front yard, and I was just getting ready to stick my tongue out at them. But then I thought about what Miss Franny had said about war being hell, and I thought about what Gloria Dump said about not judging them too hard. And so I just waved instead. They stood and stared at me, but when I was almost out of the way past, I saw Dunlap put his hand in the air and wave back. Hey! He hollered. Hey, Opal! I waved harder, and I thought about Amanda Wilkinson and how it was neat that she liked a good story the same as I did. And I wondered again. Who was Carson? Chapter 18. When we got to Gloria Dump's, I told her I had two surprises for her and asked which one she won first, the small one or the big one? The small one, said Gloria. I handed her the litmus lozenge and she moved it around in her hands, feeling it. Candy? She said. Yes, ma'am, I told her. It's called a litmus lozenge. Oh, Lord, yes. I remember these candies. My daddy used to eat 'em. She unwrapped the litmus lozenge and put it in her mouth and nodded her head. Do you like it? I asked her. Mm-hmm. She nodded her head slowly. It tastes sweet, but it also tastes like people leaving. You mean sad? I asked. Does it taste like sorrow to you? That's right, she said. It tastes sorrowful but sweet. Now, what's surprise number two? A book, I said. A book? Uh-huh, I said. It's called David Copperfield. I'm going to read it out loud to you. Just like Miss Franny Block's great-grandfather read it to her grandfather, and she read it to her father. All right, then, said Gloria Dump. She nodded. We are going to be part of a tradition. It's going to make us a long time to read this book, I told her. There are 624 pages. Hoo-wee, said Gloria. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her hands on her stomach. We best get started then. And so I read the first chapter of David Copperfield out loud to Gloria Dump. I read it loud enough to keep her ghosts away, and Gloria listened to it good. And when I was done, she said it was the best surprise she ever had, and she couldn't wait to hear chapter 2. That night I gave the preacher his litmus lozenge right before he kissed me good night. What's this? He said. It's some candy that Miss Franny's great-grandfather invented. It's called a litmus lozenge. The preacher unwrapped it and put it in his mouth, and after a minute he started rubbing his nose and nodded his head. Do you like it? I asked him. It has a peculiar flavor. Root beer? I said. Something else. Strawberry? That too. But there's still something else. It's odd. I could see the preacher getting further and further away. He was hunching up his shoulders and lowering his chin and getting ready to pull his head inside his shell. It almost tastes like melancholy, he said. Melancholy? What's that? Sad, said the preacher. He rubbed his nose some more. It makes me think of your mother. Winn-Dixie sniffed at the candy wrapper in the preacher's hand. It tastes sad, he said and sighed. It must be a bad batch. No, I told him. I sat up in bed. That's the way it's supposed to taste. Litmus came back from the war and his whole family was dead. His daddy died fighting, and his mama and his sisters died from a disease, and the Yankees burned his house down. And Litmus was sad, very sad. And what he wanted more than anything in the whole world, was something sweet. So he built a candy factory and made litmus lozenges, and he put all the sad he was feeling into the candy. My goodness, said the preacher. Winn-Dixie sniffed the candy wrapper out of the preacher's hand and started chewing on it. Give me that, I said to Winn-Dixie, but he wouldn't give it up. I had to reach inside his mouth and pull it out. You can't eat candy wrappers, I told him. The preacher cleared his throat. I thought he was going to say something important, maybe tell me another thing that he remembered about my mama. But what he said was, Opal, I had a talk with Mrs. Dewberry the other day. She said that Stevie says that you called him a bald-headed baby. It's true, I said. I did. But he calls Gloria Dump a witch all the time, and he calls Otis retarded. He once even said that his mama and I shouldn't spend all my time with old ladies. That's what he said. I think you should apologize, said the preacher. Me? I said. Yes, he said. You tell Stevie you're sorry if you said anything that hurt his feelings. I'm sure he just wants to be your friend. I don't think so, I told him. I don't think he wants to be my friend. Some people have a strange way of going about making friends, he said. You apologize. Yes, sir, I said. Then I remembered Carson. Daddy, I said, do you know anything about Amanda Wilkinson? What kind of thing? Do you know something about her and somebody named Carson? Carson was her brother. He drowned last year. He's dead? Yes, said the preacher. His family is still suffering a great deal. How old is he? 5, said the preacher. He was only 5 years old. Daddy, I said, how could you not tell me about something like that? Other people's tragedies should not be the subject of idle conversation. There was no reason for me to tell you. It's just that I needed to know, I said, because it helps explain Amanda. No wonder she's so pinched-faced. What's that? Said the preacher. Nothing, I said. Good night, India Opal, the preacher said. He leaned over and kissed me, and I smelled the root beer and the strawberry and the sadness all mixed together on his breath. He patted Winn-Dixie on the head and got up and turned off the light and closed the door. I didn't go to sleep that night. I lay there and thought of how life was like a litmus lozenge, how the sweet and the sad were all mixed up together, and how hard it was to separate them out. It was confusing. Daddy! I shouted. After a minute he opened the door and raised his eyebrows at me. What was that word you said? The word that meant sad? Melancholy, he said. Melancholy, I repeated. I liked the way it sounded, like there was music hidden somewhere inside it. Good night now, the preacher said. Good night, I told him back. I got up out of bed and unwrapped a litmus lozenge and sucked on it hard and thought about my mama leaving me. That was a melancholy feeling. And then I thought about Amanda and Carson, and that made me feel melancholy too. Poor Amanda, and poor Carson. He was the same age as Sweetie Pie, but he would never get to have his 6th birthday party. Chapter 19. In the morning, me and Winn-Dixie went down to sweep the pet store, and I took a litmus lozenge for Otis. Is it Halloween? Otis asked when I handed him the candy. No, I said. Why? Well, you're giving me candy. It's just a gift, I told him. For today. Oh, said Otis. He unwrapped the litmus lozenge and put it in his mouth, and after a minute tears started rolling down his face. Thank you, he said. Do you like it? I asked him. He nodded his head. It tastes good, but it also tastes a little bit like being in jail. Gertrude! Gertrude squawked. She picked up the litmus lozenge wrapper in her beak and then dropped it and looked around. Gertrude! She screamed again. You can't have any, I told her. It's not for birds. Then real quick, before I lost my nerve, I said, Otis, what were you in jail for? Are you a murderer? No, ma'am, he said. Are you a burglar? No, ma'am, Otis said again. He sucked on his candy and stared down at his pointy-toed boots. You don't have to tell me, I said. I was just wondering. I ain't a dangerous man, Otis said, if that's what you're thinking. I'm lonely, but I'm not dangerous. Okay, I said. I went into the back room to get my broom. When I came back out, Otis was standing where I left him, still staring down at his feet. It was on account of the music, he said. What was? I asked. Why I went to jail. It was on account of the music. What happened? I wouldn't stop playing my guitar. Used to be I played it on the street and sometimes people would give me money. I didn't do it for the money. I did it because the music was better if someone is listening to it. Anyway, the police came, and they told me to stop it. They said how I was breaking the law, and the whole time they were talking to me. I went right on playing my music, and that made them mad. They tried to put handcuffs on me. He sighed. I didn't like that. I wouldn't have been able to play my guitar with them on. And what happened to them? I asked him. I hit them, he whispered. You hit the police? Uh-huh. I knocked him out. Then I went to jail. And they locked me up and wouldn't let me have it my guts. And when they finally let me use, or when they finally let me out, they made me promise I would never play my guitar on the street again. He looked up at me real quick and then back down on his boots. I don't know I only played in here, but for the animals, uh, the the human Gertrude, she owns this shop, and she gave me this job when she read about me in the paper and said it's alright for me to play music for the animals. You play for me and Winn-Dixie. You play your music for me and Winn-Dixie and Sweetie Pie, I said. Yeah, he agreed, but you ain't on the street. Thank you for telling me about it, Otis, I said. It's alright, I said. I don't mind. Let's see here. Sweetie Pie came in and I gave her a litmus orange and she spit it right out. She said that it tasted bad. She, she would, say, she would say it, she said that it tasted like not having a dog. There we go. I swept the floor real slow that day. I wanted to keep Otis company. I didn't want him to be lonely. Sometimes it seems like everybody in the world was lonely. I thought about my mama. Thinking about her at the same time as the whole was the keep on mind with your tongue after you watch a tooth or after you lose a tooth. Time after time my mind kept going to that creepy spot where the spot where I felt like she should be. So hopefully I didn't mess up on the reading of that, because I don't like messing up reading something like this. Chapter 20. When I told Gloria Dunlap about Otis and how he got arrested, she laughed so hard she had to grab hold of her false teeth so they wouldn't fall out of her mouth. Ooh-wee! She said when she was finally done laughing. That sure is some dangerous criminal. He's a lonely man, I told her. He just wants to play his music for somebody. Gloria wiped her eyes with the hem of her dress. I know it, sugar, she said, but sometimes things are so sad they get to be funny. You know what else? I said, still thinking about sad things. Sad things. That girl I told you about, the pinch-faced one, Amanda? Well, her brother drowned last year. He was only 5 years old, the same age as Sweetie Pie Thomas. Gloria stopped smiling. She nodded her head. I remember hearing about that, she said. I remember hearing about a little drowned boy. That's why Amanda is so pinched-faced, I said. She misses her brother. Most likely, Gloria agreed. Do you think everybody misses somebody, like I miss my mama? Mm-hmm, said Gloria. She closed her eyes. I believe sometimes that the whole world has an aching heart. I couldn't stand to think about sad things that couldn't be helped anymore, so I said, Do you want to hear some more about David Copperfield? Yes, indeed, said Gloria. I've been looking forward to it all day. Let's see what happens to that child. I opened up David Copperfield and started to read, but the whole time I was thinking about Otis, worrying about him not being allowed to play his guitar for people. I needed to find him as some people to listen to his music. And then it came to me, the solution for Otis's aching heart, for everyone's aching heart. I know what we need to do, I said. I slammed the book shut. Winn-Dixie's head shot up from underneath Gloria's chair. He looked up around all nervous-like. Huh? Said Gloria, dumb. Have a party, I told her. We need to have a party and invite Miss Franny Block and the preacher and Otis can play his guard for everyone. Sweetie Pie can come too. She listens to his music. She listens to his music good. Who? Gloria asked. Me and you. We can't make some food and have party right there in the yard. Humans, said Gloria dumb. We could make peanut butter sandwiches and cut them up in triangles to make them look fancy. Lord, said Gloria Dump, I don't know if the world would like peanut butter as much as you would, me and this dog. Okay then, I said. We could make egg salad sandwiches and like those. You know how, to make egg salad? Wait, hold on. It's like, oh then, okay then, I said. We could make egg salad sandwiches. Adults like those. Let's see here. Uh, you have to make an egg. You know how to make an egg salad? Egg salad? Salad? No, ma'am, I said. I don't have a mutual record. I don't have a I don't have a. Wait, why did I say what I just said? That's very wrong. No, ma'am, I said. I don't have a mama around to teach me things like that. But I bet you know. You could teach me in your prime. Maybe, said Gloria Dunlap. She puts her hand on Winn-Dixie's head. She smiled at me. I knew she was what I knew she was telling me yes. Thank you, I said. I went over and hugged her. I squeezed her hand hard. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail all trying to fit in between the two of us. He couldn't stop being left out for anything. It's going to be the best party ever, I told Gloria. You might want to make me one pony, though, Gloria said. Uh, all right, I told her. Uh, you got to invite, you got to invite them Dewberry boys. Dunlap and Stevie? Uh, mm, mm, mm. Ain't gonna be no party unless you invite them. Mm, mm. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on a second. Uh, okay, we're actually on this page. Alright. Alright. Actually, because I can feel something coming, I'm gonna go ahead and get me a quick glass of tea. Give me 5 minutes tops and I will be right back. Ow, my foot. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to bonk the camera like I did. Sorry about that. Alright. 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 Okay. I have returned. Alright. Now I'm actually going to go back a little bit because there's a part of this that I don't remember reading. Probably did, but I don't remember reading it. So I'm going to go back to where I was at before. Alright. So let's go back to the part where she was reading David Copperfield, so that way we know the build up to it. I opened up David Copperfield and started to read, but the whole time I was thinking about Otis, worrying about him not being allowed to play his guitar for people. I needed to find him some people to listen to his music, and then it came to me. The solution for Otis's aching heart, for everyone's aching heart. I know what we need to do, I said. I slammed the book shut. Winn-Dixie's head shot up from underneath Gloria's chair. He looked around all nervous like. Huh? Said Gloria's dumb. Have a party, I told her. We need to have a party and invite Miss Franny Block and the preacher and Otis can play his guitar for everybody. Sweetie Pie can come too. She listens to his music good. We who? Gloria asked. We, me and you. We can make some food and have the party right here in your yard. Said Gloria dumb. We can make peanut butter sandwiches and cut them up in triangles to make them look fancy. Lord, said Gloria dumb, I don't know if the whole world would like peanut butter as much as you and me and this dog. Okay then, I said. We can make egg salad sandwiches. Adults like those. Yeah, they're actually egg salad sandwiches are pretty good, I'll admit that. You know how to make egg salad? No, ma'am, I said. I don't have a mama around to teach me things like that. But I bet you know. I bet you could teach me. Please? Maybe, said Gloria Dump. She put her hand on Winn-Dixie's head. She smiled at me. I knew she was telling me yes. Thank you, I said. I went over and hugged her. I squeezed her hard. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail and tried to get in between the two of us. He couldn't stand being left out of anything. It's going to be the best party ever, I told Gloria. You gotta make me one promise, though, Gloria said. All right, I told her. You gotta invite them Dewberry boys. Dunlap and Stevie? Ain't gonna be no party unless you invite them. I have to? Yes, said Gloria Dump. You promise me. I promise, I said. I didn't like the idea, but I promised. I started inviting people right away. I asked the preacher first. Daddy, I said. Opal? The preacher said back. Daddy, me and Winn-Dixie and Gloria Dump are having a party. Well, said the preacher, that's nice. You have a good time. Daddy, I said, I'm telling you because you're invited. Oh, said the preacher. He rubbed his nose. I see. Can you come? I asked him. He sighed. I don't see why not, he said. Miss Randy Block took to the idea right away. A party, she said, and clapped her hands together. Yes, ma'am, I told her. It's going to be a big old party. We're going to have it in Gloria Dump's yard, and we're going to serve egg salad sandwiches, and there's going to be live music, and it will be good for your heart. That sounds lovely, said Miss Franny said, and then she pointed at the back of the library and whispered, Maybe you should ask Amanda, too. She probably won't want to come, I said. She doesn't like me very much. Ask her and she would see. Ask her and see what she says. Miss Franny whispered. So I walked to the back of the library and I asked Amanda Wilkinson in my best manners voice to please come to my party. She looked around all nervous and stuff. A party? She said. Yes, I said. I sure would like it if you could come. She stared at me with her mouth open. Okay, she said after a minute. I mean, yes, thank you. I would love to. And just like I promised Gloria, I asked the Dewberry boys. I ain't going no party at a witch's house, Stevie said. Dunlap knocked Stevie with his elbow. We'll come, he said. We will not, said Stevie. The witch might cook us up in her big full witch's pot. I don't care if you come or not, I told them. I'm just asking because I promised I would help. Because I promised I would. I don't know why I added help into it. That's not even in the page. Not in that sentence, anyway. We'll be there, said Dunlap. And he nodded at me and smiled. Sweetie Pie was very excited when I invited her. What's the theme? She asked. Well, there isn't one, I said. You gotta think of a theme, she told me. She stuck her knuckle in her mouth and then pulled it back out. It ain't a party without a theme. Is this dog coming? She asked. She wrapped her arms around Winn-Dixie and squeezed him so hard that his eyes almost popped out of his head. Yes, I told her. Good, she said. You could make that the theme. It could be a dog party. I'll think about it, I told her. The last person I asked was Otis. I told him all about the party and that he was invited, and he said, No, thank you. Why not? I asked. I don't like parties, said Otis. Please, I begged. It won't be a party unless you come. I'll give you a whole free week of sweeping and arranging and dusting. If you come to the party, that's what I'll do. A whole week for free? Otis said, looking up at me. Yes, sir, I told him. But I don't have to talk to people, right? No, sir, I said. You don't. But bring your guitar. Maybe you could play us some music. Maybe, said Otis. He looked down at his boots again real quick, trying to hide his smile. Thank you, I told him. Thank you for deciding to come. We are now 6 chapters away. After this chapter, we would be 5 chapters away from finishing the story already. This is literally about to be 2.5 hours. So if I read this quick enough, I may just do this bonus book, and it is a very short book. And I know it's a short book because it's like a kid's book involving a certain popular Looney Tunes character. I'll let you take a guess on who it is. You don't have to say anything, just take a wild guess. Chapter 21, getting back into the book. After I got Otis convinced to come, the rest of getting ready for the party was easy and fun. Me and Gloria decided to have the party at night when it would be cooler. In the afternoon before, we worked in Gloria's kitchen and made egg salad sandwiches. We cut them up in triangles and cut off the crust and put little toothpicks with frilly tops in them. Winn-Dixie sat in the kitchen and looked at us the whole time. He kept on wagging his tail. That dog thinks we're making these sandwiches for him, said Gloria Dunn. Winn-Dixie showed Gloria all his teeth. These ain't for you, she told him. But when she thought I wasn't looking, she gave Winn-Dixie an egg salad sandwich without the toothpick. We also made punch. We mixed together orange juice and grapefruit juice and soda in a big bowl. Gloria called it dump punch. She said she was world famous for it, but I had never heard of it before. The last thing we did was decorate the yard all up. I strung pink and orange and yellow crepe paper in the trees to make it look fancy. We also filled up paper bags with sand and put candles in them, and right before it was time for the party to start, I went around and lit all the candles. It turned Gloria Dump's yard into a fairyland. Said Gloria Dump, looking around. Even somebody with bad eyes can tell it looks good. It did look pretty. It looked so pretty that it made my heart feel funny, all swollen and full, and I wished desperately that I knew where my mama was so she could come to the party too. Miss Franny Block was the first person to arrive. She was wearing a pretty green dress that was all shiny and shimmery, and she had on high-heeled shoes that made her wobble back and forth when she walked. Even when she was standing still, she still kind of swayed, like she was standing on a boat. She was carrying a large, big glass bowl full of lozenges. I brought a whole after dinner. I brought a little after dinner treat, she said, handing the bowl to me. Thank you, I said. I put the bowl on the table, next to the egg salad sandwiches and the punch. Then I introduced Miss Franny to Gloria, and they shook hands and said polite things to each other. And then Sweetie Pie's mother came by with Sweetie Pie. Sweetie Pie had a whole handful of pictures of dogs that she had cut out of magazines. It's to help you with your theme, she said. You can use them to decorate. I brought tape too. And she started going around taping the pictures of the dogs to trees and chairs and the table. She ain't talked about nothing but this party all day long, said her mother. Can you walk her home when it's over? I promised that I would, and then I introduced Sweetie Pie to Miss Franny and Gloria, and right after that the preacher showed up. He was wearing a coat and tie and looked real serious. He shook Gloria Dump's hand and Miss Franny Block's hand, and said how pleased he was to meet them both, and how he had heard nothing but good things about both of them. He patted Sweetie Pie on the head and said it was good to see her outside of church. And the whole time Winn-Dixie was standing right in the middle of everybody, wagging his tail so hard that I thought for sure he would knock Miss Franny right off her high heels. Amanda Wilkinson came and she had her blonde hair all curled up and she looked shy and not as mean as usual. And I stood real close to her and introduced her to Gloria Dump. I was surprised at how glad I was to see Amanda, and I wanted to tell her I knew about Carson. I wanted to tell her I understood about losing people, but I didn't say anything. I was just extra nice. Real quick, just wanted to point out it's actually a good idea that she didn't, because then that would have made the party very awkward. Because trying to talk to somebody about something real serious in the middle of a party, yeah, probably not the best idea. Going back into the story now, we were all standing around smiling at one another and acting kind of nervous when a real screechy voice said, Gertrude is a pretty bird. Winn-Dixie's ears went up over his head, went up on his head, and he barked once and looked around. I looked too, but I didn't see Gertrude or Otis. I'll be right back, I said to everybody. Me and Winn-Dixie were running around in the front of the house, and sure enough, standing there on the sidewalk was Otis. He had his guitar on his back and Gertrude on his shoulder, and in his hands he was holding the biggest jar of pickles I had ever seen in my life. Otis, I said to him, come on around back, that's where the party is. Oh, he said, but he didn't move. He just stood there, holding onto his jar of pickles. Dog! Screeched Gertrude. She flew off of Otis's shoulder and landed on Winn-Dixie's head. It's all right, Otis, I told him. It's just a few people. Hardly any people at all. Oh, said Otis again. He looked around like he was lost. Then he held up the jar of pickles. I brought pickles, he said. I saw them, I said. It's just exactly what we needed. They will go perfect with the egg salad sandwiches. I talked to him real soft and gentle and low, like he was a wild animal that I was trying to get to take food out of my hand. He took one tiny step forward. Come on, I whispered. I started walking and Winn-Dixie followed me. And when I turned around, I saw Otis was following me too. Chapter 22. Otis followed me all the way into the backyard where the party was. Before he could run away, I introduced him to the preacher. Daddy, I said, this is Otis. He's the one who runs Gertrude's Pets. He's the one who plays the guitar so good. How do you do? Said the preacher. He stuck his hand out to Otis. And Otis stood there and shuffled his big jar of pickles back and forth, trying to free up a hand to offer back to the preacher. Finally, he ended up bending over and setting the jar down on the ground. But when he did that, his guitar slid forward and hit him in the head with a little boing sound. Sweetie Pie laughed and pointed at him like he was doing the whole thing on purpose just to amuse her. Ouch, said Otis. He stood back up and took the guitar off his shoulder and put it down on the ground next to the jar of pickles, and then he wiped his hands on his pants and stuck it out to the preacher, who took it and said, It sure is a pleasure to shake your hand. Thank you, said Otis. I brought pickles. I noticed, said the preacher. After the preacher and Otis were done shaking hands, I introduced Otis to Miss Franny Block and to Amanda. And then I introduced him to Gloria Dump. Gloria took his hand and smiled at him, and Otis looked right in her eyes and smiled back. He smiled big. I brought pickles for your party, Otis told her. And I am so glad, she said. It just ain't a party without pickles. Otis looked down at his big jar of pickles. His face was all red. Opal, said Gloria, when are them boys getting here? I don't know, I said. I shrugged. I told them what time we were starting. What I didn't tell her was that they probably weren't coming because they were afraid to go to a party at a witch's house. Well, said Gloria, we got egg salad sandwiches, we got dump punch, we got pickles, we got dog pictures, we got litmus lozenges, and we got a preacher who can bless this party for us. Gloria Dump looked over at the preacher. He nodded his head and Gloria cleared his throat and said, Dear God, thank you for warm summer nights and candlelight and good food. But thank you most of all for friends. We appreciate the complicated and wonderful gifts you give us and each other. And we appreciate the task you put down before us of loving each other the best we can, even as you love us. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Amen, said Gloria Dump. Amen, I whispered. Gertrude, croaked Gertrude. Are we fixing to eat now? Sweetie Pie asked. Shh, said Amanda. Winn-Dixie sneezed. There was a far-off rumble of thunder. I thought at first that it was Winn-Dixie's stomach growling. It ain't supposed to rain, said Gloria Dump. They didn't predict no rain. This dress is silk, said Miss Franny Block. I cannot get it wet. Maybe we should go inside, said Amanda. The preacher looked up at the sky. And just then, the rain came pouring down. Of course it would happen. Leave it to Mother Nature to be that much of a problem to do that. Of course that would happen. Yeah, Mother Nature can be problematic sometimes, I'm telling you. Chapter 23. Save the sandwiches, Gloria Dump yelled to me. Save the punch. I got my dog pictures, screamed Sweetie Pie. She went running around, tearing them off the trees and the chairs. Don't worry, she kept shouting. I got 'em. I grabbed a platter of egg salad sandwiches and the preacher grabbed the punch and we ran into the kitchen with them. And when I ran back outside, I saw that Amanda had hold of Miss Franny Block and was helping her into the house. Miss Franny was so teetery in her high heels that the rain would have knocked her right over if Amanda hadn't held on to her. I grabbed Gloria Dump's arm. I'm all right, she said, but she put her hand on my arm and held on to me tight. I looked around the garden before we left. All the parade paper was melted and the candles were out, and then I saw Otis. He was standing there by this jar of pickles, looking down at his feet. Otis! I hollered at him over the rain. Come on, we're going inside! When we got in the kitchen, Amanda and Miss Franny were laughing and shaking themselves like dogs. What a downpour, said Miss Franny. Wasn't that something? That came right out of nowhere. That came right out of nowhere, said the preacher. Whoo-wee, said Gloria. Oh, squawked Gertrude. I looked at her. She was sitting on the kitchen table. The thunder was really booming and cracking. Oh no, I said. I looked around the kitchen. Don't worry, said Sweetie Pie. I saved them dog pictures. I got 'em right here. She waved around her wad of magazine pages. Where's Winn-Dixie? I shouted. I forgot about him. I was just thinking about the party and I forgot about Winn-Dixie. I forgot about protecting him from the thunder. Now, Opal, the preacher said, is probably right out in the yard, hiding underneath a chair. Come on, you and I will go look. Hold on, said Gloria Dump. Let me get you a flashlight and some umbrellas. But I didn't want to wait. I went running out into the yard. I looked under all the chairs and around all the bushes. I called his name real loud. I felt like crying. It was my fault. I was supposed to hold on to him, and I forgot. Opal! I heard the preacher call. I looked up. He was standing on the porch with Gloria, and Dunlap and Stevie Dewberry were standing there too. Your guests are here, the preacher said. I don't care, I hollered. Come on up here, Gloria Dump said, her voice all hard and serious. She showed her flashlight out at me. I walked up onto the porch and she handed me the flashlight. Tell these boys, hey, she said. Tell them you're glad they came here and that you will be right back just as soon as you find your dog. Hey, I said. Thank you for coming. I just gotta find Winn-Dixie and then I'll be right back. Stevie stared at me with his mouth wide open. You want me to help? Dunlap asked. I shook my head. I tried not to cry. Come here, child, Gloria Dump said. She reached for me and pulled me close to her and whispered in my ear. There ain't no way you can hold on to something that wants to go, you understand? You can only love what you got while you got it. She squeezed me hard. Good luck now, she called, Good luck now, she called, as me and the preacher stepped off the porch and out into the rain. Good luck, Miss Franny called from the kitchen. That dog ain't lost, I heard Sweetie Pie holler to somebody inside. That dog's too smart to get lost. I turned around and looked back, and the last thing I saw was the porch light shining on Dunlap Dewberry's bald head. It made me sad, him standing on Gloria's porch, his bald head glowing. Dunlap saw me looking, and he raised up his hand and waved to me. I didn't wave back. Chapter 24. Me and the preacher started walking and calling Winn-Dixie's name. I was glad it was raining so hard because it made it easy to cry. I cried and cried and cried, and the whole time I was calling for Winn-Dixie. Winn-Dixie! I screamed. Winn-Dixie! The preacher shouted. And then he whistled loud and long, but Winn-Dixie didn't show up. We walked all through downtown. We walked past the Dewberry's house and the Herman W. Block Memorial Library and Sweetie Pie's yellow house and Gertrude's Pets. We walked out to the Friendly Corners trailer park and looked underneath our trailer. We walked all the way out to the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. We walked past the railroad tracks and right on down Highway 50. Cars were rushing past us and their taillights glowed red, like mean eyes staring at us. Daddy, I said. Daddy, what if he got run over? Opal, the preacher said. We can't worry about what might have happened. All we can do is keep looking. We walked and walked, and in my head I started on a list of 10 things that I knew about Winn-Dixie. 10 what things I could write on big old posters and put up around the neighborhood. Things that would help people look for him. Number 1 was that he had a pathological fear of thunderstorms. Number 2 was that he liked to smile, using all his teeth. Number 3 was he could run fast. Number 4 was that he snored. Number 5 was that he could catch mice without squishing them to death. Number 6 was he liked to meet people. Number 7 was he liked to eat peanut butter. Number 8 was he couldn't stand to be left alone. Number 9 was he liked to sit on couches and sleep in beds. Number 10 was he didn't mind going to church. I kept on going over and over the list in my head. I memorized it the same way I had memorized a list of 10 things about my mama. I memorized it so if I didn't find him, I would have some part of him to hold on to. But at the same time, I thought of something I had never thought of before, and that was the list of things couldn't even begin to show somebody the real Winn-Dixie, just like a list of 10 things couldn't ever get me to know my mama, and thinking about that made me cry even more. Me and the preacher looked for a long time, and finally he said we had to quit. But Daddy, I said, Winn-Dixie's out there somewhere. We can't leave him. Opal, the preacher said, we have looked and looked, and there's only so much looking we can do. I can't believe you're going to give up, I told him. India Opal, the preacher said, rubbing his nose. Don't argue with me. I stood and stared at him. The rain had let up soon, some. It was mostly a drizzle now. It's time to head back, the preacher said. No, I told him. You go ahead and go, but I'm going to keep on looking. Opal, the preacher said in a real soft voice. It's time to give up. You always give up, I shouted. You always pulling your head inside your stupid old turtle shell. I bet you didn't even go out looking for my mama when she left. I bet you just let her run off too. Baby, the preacher said, I couldn't stop her. I tried. Don't you think I wanted her to stay too? Don't you think I miss her every day? He spread his arms out wide and then dropped them to his sides. I tried, he said. I tried. Then he did something I couldn't believe. He started to cry. The preacher was crying. His shoulders were moving up and down, and he was making snuffling noises. And don't believe that losing Winn-Dixie doesn't upset me as much as it does you, he said. I love that dog. I love him too. Daddy, I said. I went and wrapped my arms around his waist. He was crying so hard that he was shaking. It's all right, I told him. It's okay. Shh. I said to him like he was a scared little kid. Everything will be okay. We stood there hugging and rocking back and forth, and after a while the preacher stopped shaking and I still held on to him. And I finally got the nerve to ask the question I wanted to ask. Do you think she's ever going to come back? I whispered. No, the preacher said. No, I do not. I've hoped and prayed and dreamed about it for years, but I don't think she'll ever come back. Gloria says that you can't hold on to anything, that you can only love what you've got while you've got it. She's right, the preacher said. Gloria Dump is right. I'm not ready to let Winn-Dixie go, I said. I had forgotten about him for a minute, what with thinking about my mama. We'll keep looking, said the preacher. The two of us will keep looking for him. But do you know what? I just realized something, India Opal. When I told you your mama took everything with her, I forgot one thing. One very important thing that she left behind. What? I asked. You, he said. Thank God your mama left me you. And he hugged me tighter. I'm glad I've got you too, I told him. and I meant it. I took hold of his hand and we started walking back into town, calling and whistling for Winn-Dixie the whole way. Chapter 25. The penultimate chapter. We heard the music before we even got to Gloria Dump's house. We heard it almost a block away. It was guitar playing and singing and clapping. I wonder what's going on, my father said. We walked up to Gloria's sidewalk and around back through her yard and into her kitchen. What we saw was Otis playing his guitar and Miss Franny and Gloria sitting there smiling and singing, and Gloria holding Sweetie Pie in her lap. Amanda and Dunlap and Stevie were sitting on the kitchen floor, clapping along and having the best possible time. Even Amanda was smiling. I couldn't believe they were so happy when Winn-Dixie was missing. We couldn't find him, I shouted at them. The music stopped and Gloria Dumb looked at me and said, Child, we know you didn't find him. You didn't find him because he was right here all along. She took her cane and poked at something under her chair. Come on out of there, she said. There was a snuffle and a sigh. He's asleep, she said. He's plumb wore out. She poked him around with her cane again, and Winn-Dixie stood up from underneath her chair and yawned. Winn-Dixie, I hollered. Dog! Gertrude squawked. This parrot is ruining all the good moments, I'm telling you. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail and showed me all his teeth and sneezed. I went pushing past everybody. I dropped to the floor and wrapped my arms around him. Where have you been? I asked him. He yawned again. How did you find him? I asked. Now there's a story, said Miss Franny. Gloria, why don't you tell it? Well, said Gloria Dump, we was all just sitting around waiting on you two. And after I convinced them Newbury boys that I ain't no scary witch all full of spells and potions. She ain't no witch, Stevie said. He shook his bald head. He looked kind of disappointed. Nah, said Dunlap. She ain't. If she was, she would have turned us into toads by now, he grinned. I could have told you that she wasn't a witch. Witches don't exist, said Amanda. They're just myths. All right now, said Gloria. What happened was we got through all them witchy things, and then Franny said, why don't we have a little music while we wait for you two to get back? And so Otis played his guitar and woo-wee! There ain't a song we don't know. And if you don't know it, he can pick it up right quick if you hum it to him. He has a gift. Gloria stopped and smiled over at Otis, and he smiled back. He looked all lit up from the inside. Tell what happened, Sweetie Pie said. Tell about that dog. So, said Gloria, Franny and me, we started thinking about all these songs we knew from when we was girls. We got Otis to play them, and we started singing them and teaching the words to these children. And then somebody sneezed, Sweetie Pie shouted. That's right, said Gloria. Somebody sneezed, and it wasn't none of us. So we looked around, wondering who did, thinking that maybe we got us a burglar in the house. We looked around, and we didn't see nothing, so we started them to singing again. And sure enough, there was another big achoo! Sounded like it was coming from my bedroom, so I sent Otis in there. I said, Otis, go in there and see who was sneezing. So Otis went. And do you know what we found? I shook my head. Winn-Dixie! Shouted Sweetie Pie. That dog of yours was all hid underneath my bed, squeezed under there like the world was about to end. But he was smiling like a fool every time he heard Otis play the guitar, smiling so hard he sneezed. My daddy laughed. It is true, Miss Franny said. It's the truth, said Stevie. Dunlap nodded and smiled right at me. So, Gloria Dumb said, Otis played his guitar right to that dog and a little bit at a time. Winn-Dixie came creeping out from underneath the bed. He was covered in dust, said Amanda. He looked like a ghost, said Dunlap. Yeah, said Sweetie Pie, just like a ghost. Said Gloria. Looked just like a ghost. Anyway, the storm stopped after a while, and your dog settled in under my chair and fell asleep, and that's where he's been ever since. Just waiting on you to come back and find him. Winn-Dixie, I said. I hugged him so tight he wheezed. We were out there whistling and calling for you, and you were right here all along. Thank you, I said to everybody. Well, said Gloria Dump, we didn't do nothing. We just sat here and waited and sang some songs. We all gotta be good friends. Now, the punch ain't nothing but water, and the egg salad sandwiches got torn up by the rain. You gotta eat 'em with a spoon if you want egg salad. But we got pickles to eat, and litmus lozenges, and we still got a party going on. My daddy pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. Otis, he said, do you know any hymns? I know some, said Otis. You hum it, said Miss Randy, nodding her head, and you can play it. So my daddy started humming something, and Otis started picking it out on his guitar. And Winn-Dixie wagged his tail and lay back down underneath Gloria's chair. I looked around the room at the different faces, and I felt my heart swell up inside me with pure happiness. I'll be back in a minute, I said. But they were all sitting now and laughing, and Winn-Dixie was snoring, so no one heard me. Alright, chapter 26, in the final chapter of the book. Outside, the rain had stopped and the clouds had gone away, and the sky was so clear it seemed like I could see every star ever made. I walked all the way to the back of Gloria Dump's yard. I walked back there and looked at her mistake tree. The bottles were quiet. There wasn't a breeze, so they were just hanging there. I looked at the tree and then I looked up at the sky. Mama, I said, just like she was standing right beside me. I know about 10 things about you, and that's not enough. That's not near enough, but Daddy is going to tell me more. I know he will, now that he knows you're not coming back. He misses you, and I miss you, but my heart doesn't feel empty anymore. It's full all the way up. I still think about you, I promise, but probably not as much as I did this summer. That's what I said that night underneath Gloria Dump's mistake tree. And after I was done saying it, I stood just staring up at the sky, looking at the constellations and planets. And then I remembered my own tree, the one Gloria had helped me plant. I hadn't looked at it for a long time. I went crawling around on my hands and knees searching for it. And when I found it, I was surprised at how much it had grown. It was still small. It still looked more like a plant than a tree, but the leaves and the branches felt real strong and good and right. And I was down there on my knees when I heard a voice say, Are you praying? I looked up. It was Dunlap. No, I said. I'm not praying. I'm thinking. He crossed his arms and looked down at me. What about? He asked. All kinds of different things, I said. I'm sorry that I called you and Stevie bald-headed babies. That's all right, he said. Gloria told me to come out here and get you. I told you she wasn't a witch. I know it, he said. I knew it all along. I was just teasing you. Oh, I said. I looked at him close. It was hard to see him good in the dark yard. Ain't you gonna stand up? He asked. Yeah, I said. And then he surprised me. He did something I never in a million years thought a Dewberry boy would do. He held out his hand to help me up, and I took it. I let him pull me to my feet. I'll race you back to the house, Dunlap said, and he started to run. Okay, I shouted, but I'm warning you, I'm fast. We ran, and I beat him. I touched the corner of Gloria Dump's house right before he did. You shouldn't be running around in the dark, said Amanda. She was standing on the porch looking at us. You could trip over something. Amanda, said Dunlap, and he shook his head. Amanda, I said too. And then I remembered Carson and I felt bad for her. I went up on the porch and took hold of her hand and pulled on her. Come on, I said. Let's go inside. India Opal, Daddy said when me and Amanda and the Dunlap walked in. Are you here to sing some songs with us? Yes, sir, I said. Only I don't know that many songs. We'll teach you, he said. He smiled at me real big. It was a good thing to see. That's right, said Gloria Dump. We will. Sweetie Pie was still sitting in her lap, but her eyes were closed. Care for a litmus lozenge? Said Miss Franny asked, passing me a bowl. Thank you, I told her. I took a litmus lozenge and unwrapped it and put it in my mouth. Do you want a pickle? Otis asked, holding up his big jar of pickles. No, thank you, I said. Not right now. Winn-Dixie came out from underneath Gloria Dunlap's chair. He sat down next to me and leaned into me, and the same as I was leaning into my daddy. And Amanda stood right there beside me, and when I looked over at her, she didn't look pinch-faced at all to me. Dunlap cracked his knuckles and said, Well, are we going to sing or what? Yeah, Stevie echoed. Are we going to sing or what? Let's sing, said Sweetie Pie, opening her eyes and sitting up straight. Let's sing for the dog. Otis laughed and strummed his guitar, and the flavor of the litmus lozenge opened in my mouth like a flower blooming, all sweet and sad. And then Otis and Gloria and Stevie and Miss Franny and Dunlap and Amanda and Sweetie Pie and my daddy all started to sing a song, and I listened careful so I could learn it right. Afterword by Kate DiCamillo. Because, of course, every time I see a foreword and an afterword, I'm going to read them along with the book. That's just how I am. Afterword by Kate DiCamillo. Sometime in the first year that Because of Winn-Dixie was published, I received a letter from a young reader who told me that she kept the book by her bed. If she woke up in the middle of the night and felt afraid or worried, she would read a random few pages and feel comforted enough to go back to sleep. The other thing she did when she couldn't sleep, she said, was to go out to the kitchen and drink some pickle juice directly out of the jar. I could not speak to the soporific power of pickle juice, but I do know about the comforting power of words. I was a kid who lived for the story, a kid comforted by the mere presence of books. It's not surprising, I suppose, that I grew up to be a writer. What is surprising is what happened when Because of Winn-Dixie was published. I was 36 years old. Because of Winn-Dixie was my first book, and suddenly I was on the receiving end of tremendous and astonishing and overwhelming amount of love. Love for Winn-Dixie, and love for Opal and Miss Franny Block and Sweetie Pie Thomas and Gloria Dump. People opened their hearts to the characters in this book. They opened their hearts to me. Because of Winn-Dixie, my whole life changed. I knew that reading books could provide community and comfort and love. I did not know that writing books would do the same. I also did not know that this book changed my life so much would give me the chance to change again. When I wrote this story more than 20 years ago, I gave Opal and Gloria Dump a classic novel of the South to share, Gone with the Wind. But when I reread Because of Winn-Dixie in preparation for this anniversary edition, I found it painful to see Opal and Gloria Dump sitting together, side by side, reading from a book that I cannot in good conscience recommend to my readers. I am grateful for this chance to give Opal and Gloria a different book to share. A book that, while it is not perfect, does not diminish either one's humanity. Speaking of perfection, no book is ever perfect, and there are certainly more things that could be changed in Because of Winn-Dixie. The Dewberry Boys used a derogatory word about Otis, and another derogatory word about Gloria Dunlap. I thought about taking those words out, but books are a place where readers are given a chance to see things differently. The Dewberry Boys learned to see Otis and Gloria Dump for who they truly are. They changed their minds. We, as readers, get to change our minds too. What a great, grand gift that is, to change. Thank you, the preacher says at Gloria Dump's backyard party, for warm summer nights and candlelight and good food. But thank you most of all for friends. We appreciate the complicated and wonderful gifts you give us and each other. And we appreciate the tasks you put down before us. of loving each other the best we can, even as you love us. The words I'm writing now are a thank you to all of you, readers, friends, family, for taking me and Opal and Winn-Dixie into your hearts. They are a thank you for growing and changing with me. These words are also, of course, a thank you to that pickle juice drinking child who wrote me 20 years ago. I wonder if she knows that I think about her often. I wonder if she knows that I consider her a friend. And that is the end of the book. About the author, for those curious, because I also love reading about the authors for people that wants to know more about them. Kate DiCamillo spent most of her childhood in the South and moved to Minnesota when she was in her 20s. She was inspired to write because of Winn-Dixie, her first novel, during a bout of homesickness one brutally cold winter. The book was an immediate success. It is a Newbery Honor book and has been made into a popular family film. In addition, she is the author of The Tiger Rising, a National Book Award finalist, The Tale of Despero, a Newbery Medal winner, and also another book that was turned into a movie, this one more animated than because of Winn-Dixie. The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, The Magician's Elephant, Flora and Ulysses, a Newbery Medal winner, Grammy Nightingale, a National Book Award finalist, Louisiana's Way Home, a #1 New York Times bestseller, and Beverly Right Here. Kate DiCamillo has also written the picture books Great J, La La La, and A Piglet Named Mercy. The Mercy Watson and Tales from Decawoo's Drive series for beginning readers, and with Allison McGee, the three Binkley Golly books, also for beginning readers. Kate DiCamillo lives in Minneapolis. Now I see why so many people voted for this book to be read. It is a very comforting, very positive book with a scene shared between the preacher and India Opal, where by the time when they have this confrontation at the end of the book, she instead refers to him as Daddy instead of the preacher, which I think is a really, really cool, really good add-on, like a really good change for this book. To make her, instead, like where she's thinking of him more as a preacher, like she still loves him like a father, but it takes up until near the end of the book for her to call him as such. But yeah, so, and when I say call her as such, I mean like how the narrator side of her calls him the preacher, but the later changes him to calling him Daddy, which I think is a really cool thing about this book. So yeah, I will be doing the live, doing the live watch along stream for the movie based on this book the day after tomorrow, because I do want to do more WWE 2K24 tomorrow. So yeah, if you want to read this book for yourself, recommended. I mean, that award is not there for that award's not. The award wasn't put there for nothing. It was there. It's there for a reason. So yeah. But now, because I'm still in a reading mood. What time is it anyway? Actually, let me see. It's 15 minutes. This book won't take that long. Like I told you before, the book is literally that long. That many pages. It won't take me that long to read it. But we're gonna go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the thing as well. So, like after the live stream is over, I'm gonna put it in. But this book is titled, and this is gonna be fun for all the kiddies for the little kids that won't be able to watch this because they will likely be in bed because they likely got school tomorrow. Depends on where you are, of course. But I'm gonna read this book anyway because why not? This book right here, because of Winn-Dixie, is one of the more kid-friendly books. This one is definitely kid-friendly. Bugs Bunny Goes to the Dentist. we're gonna go ahead and read it, because why not? Alright. Bugs Bunny Goes to the Dentist by Seymour Raitt. Pictures by Lou Cornett. A Golden Book. This book was this book came out in the year 1978. And the only reason why I'm reading this book is just for the simple fact that it's short. Otherwise, I wouldn't be reading it right now. But anyway, I'm gonna do what my teachers did when I was a little kid. Where I read the book, and then when I get done with the 2 pages, I'll show off the pictures. I liked it when the teachers did that. It is because of some of my teachers that I got into the Magic Treehouse books. I would love to have the full collection of the Magic Treehouse books. I really would. But I'm pretty sure they're out of print now, unless they ever do like an anniversary kind of thing with them, which I would love, because I would love to read them for you guys. For you guys at home, because you guys know I love reading books. But of course, I would have to rate them. But I'm pretty sure most of them would be rated G, because they're obviously kid friendly. But they are more toward a bit more older kids, because when you're a little kid, you're used to like these picture books. Whereas as you get a little bit older, they start teaching you how to read chapter books, which I think is a good idea. But that's what got me into the Magic Treehouse books, because of my teachers getting me into them. And I would love, and like I said, I would love to get me those Magic Treehouse books if I could. I would very much love it. But anyway, here we are reading Bugs Bunny Goes to the Dentist real quick. It won't be that long of a read. So just I hope you enjoy it. And I apologize, because I'm going to be doing these character voices to the best of my ability. But and if I butcher it, knowing the internet, you'll let me know about it. Alright. Bugs Bunny sat at his little desk, very worried. Crumpled pictures of paper were scattered around him, and he chewed nervously on the end of his pencil. Think, Bugs, think, he muttered. Happy Tooth Week was coming, and Bugs had been asked to write a poem in praise of dental care. Tomorrow he was supposed to read his poem at the big festival, but the poem still wasn't finished. Bugs stood in front of the mirror and recited his poem in a dramatic voice. I love my pretty pearly teeth, one row above, one row beneath. I brush them morning, noon, and night. He stopped unhappily. He still needed a good last line, but no matter what he tried, he couldn't think of any. What'll I do? He groaned. I must finish this in time for the festival tomorrow. Suddenly, Bugs dashed out of the house and hurried down the street. I'll go visit good old... Oh, wait, you know what? I forgot to show off the picture. Sorry, hold on. I forgot to show off the pictures like I said I was going to. Going back to what I was reading, before I forgot. Suddenly, Bugs dashed out of the house and hurried down the street. I'm going to visit good old Dr. Gum, he said to himself. Being in a dentist's office will give me inspiration. I might get an idea for my last line. Bugs and Dr. Gum were old friends, and the dentist was glad to see him. He was just finishing with a patient, none other than Elmer Fudd. Hi, Bugs. Hold on. Oh, I got to think about him. Hold on, because I know he prefers to be talking. He prefers to be like where. Oh, I'll catch that pesky rabbit. Say your prayers, Wabbit. It's Wabbit season. Anyway. Hi, Bug. Hi, Bugs, said Elmer, getting out of the dentist chair. I just had my teeth cleaned. That's swell, Bugs replied, but it doesn't help me with my last line. Elmer put his hat on. Everybody's waiting to hear your great poem tomorrow, he said. Bugs sighed. The way things are going, they may have to change Happy Tooth Week to Unhappy Rabbits Week. After Elmer left, Bugs wandered slowly around Dr. Gum's office. He admired the comfortable chair with which went up and down. It also tilted forward and back. Over the chair there was a big light which helped the doctor see into people's mouths. Bugs also examined the drill which Dr. Gum used to remove decayed places which made holes or cavities in teeth. Remember when the drill used to scare you? Asked Dr. Gum. It still does a little, sighed Bugs. Nobody really likes having their teeth drilled, said Dr. Gum. But it's better than having infections and toothaches. And the drill goes so fast that you can hardly feel it. That's what they all say. I'm just saying. That's what they all say. Near the big chair, there was a shelf where the doctor kept lots of small tools. There were metal picks and scrapers to clean teeth with. There was a small glass box filled with cotton balls. And there was a tiny mirror with a handle on it for looking into a patient's mouth. Bugs picked up the mirror and peeked into it, but all he could see was one large rabbit eye. Bugs shook his head. My plan isn't working, he mumbled. No ideas. I may as well go home. But when he looked outside, he saw Bully Benson coming down the street. Bully Benson was very big, also very tough. Bugs had been teasing him, and now Bully was out to get even. Uh-oh, Bugs started nervously. I'd better hang around here until Bully is gone. He watched as Bully settled himself at the bottom of Dr. Gum's front steps. Bugs scooted back into the examining room. Doc, he said, how about cleaning the old choppers? Happy Tooth Week starts tomorrow, and I want my teeth to be very happy. Dr. Gum was surprised. He looked at his records. I cleaned your teeth just last month, he said. Please, Bugs begged, as a special favor. Dr. Gum shook his head as he put some paste on his cleaning machine and started polishing Bugs Bunny's teeth. You're some rabbit, he said, smiling. Finished out at last, Bugs peeked outside again. Bully Benson was still there. Doc, how about some x-rays? Bugs asked. Hold it. Hold it, Dr. Gum exclaimed. You don't need any x-rays. Anyway, I have to go pick up my lunch. He took off his white coat and put on a sports jacket. You can stay if you want, he said to Bugs, but don't touch my equipment. There's a reason why doctors tell you not to touch things that you don't know. Because if you don't know what you're doing with it and you mess with them, somebody could get hurt. So do what the dentist said. Do what the dentist and doctor say. Don't mess with things you don't know. You don't understand. Don't mess with things you don't understand. Okay? Okay. Bugs was alone in the office. I'll be safe here till the coast is clear, he sighed. But when he looked out the window, he saw Bully Benson coming up the steps. Oh my gosh, he groaned. What a mess! Bugs Bunny acted fast. He pulled on Dr. Gum's white coat. He found the bottom end of a mop and plopped it on his head. He glued a small black comb under his nose. And just as he finished, in marched Bully Benson. You gotta see me, Doc. I saw your last patient leave, so I know you're free, said Bully. He climbed into the dentist's chair and poked out his jaw. My teeth hurt, Doc, especially this one up here. You better have a look at it. Bugs took Dr. Gum's little mirror and peered into Bully's mouth. He tried to disguise his voice. Oh, harump, he said. Looks like a Glumus and a Frumus. When's the last time you saw a dentist? Gosh, said Bully. I never go to the dentist. Never? Yelped Bugs. But that's terrible. Bully shrugged. Why go to the dentist if nothing hurts? He asked. That sounds dumb to me. It's not dumb, it's smart, said Bugs, getting excited. Oh wait, I don't think I ever showed off what the pictures were. Sorry. That's twice now. 3 times and I'm out. 3 times and that's a strike. Anyway, if the dentist finds a cavity when it's teeny, you can fill it easily. But if you let it go, the cavity gets bigger and then you have real trouble. I always brush my teeth 3 times a day and see Dr. Gum twice a year, and Bully sat up puzzled. But aren't you Dr. Gum? Bug saw his mistake. Sure, he said nervously. He's me, all right. I mean, I'm him. That is... Bugs backed away and tripped over a stool. His mop wig fell off and his fake mustache came loose. Bully Benson jumped up. So, he shouted, it's you! Uh-oh. Bugs is in trouble now, apparently, looks like. Oops, scolded Bugs. Excuse me. He turned and ran out for the door as fast as he could. Outside, Dr. Gum was just coming back with his lunch. Hi, Doc, here's your coat, Bugs gasped. Then he raced down the street with Bully Benson pounding along right behind him. Wait a minute, Bully yelled. Bugs Bunny was a very fast rabbit. He was also a very scared rabbit. But Bully was fast, too. They ran down streets and up alleys, through yards and around trees, over hydrants and under benches. But Bugs couldn't shake Bully loose. Bully kept shouting for Bugs to wait for him. Bugs knew what that meant. Bully wanted to beat him up. Near the park, Bugs saw some empty trash cans. Quick as a wink, he drove into one and pulled the lid over him. I'll hide here until he goes by, panted Bugs. Soon he heard running steps. Then everything was quiet. After a few moments, Bugs raised his head slowly and peered around. He gave a loud yelp. Bully Benson was peering out of the very next can. Now, said Bully, making a swipe in the air. Oh, no, you don't, cried Bugs, and off he went again with Bully behind him. Bugs raced into an alley. Too late, he saw that it was a dead end, with a high wooden fence blocking his way. Bugs huffed, puffed, and scrambled up the fence. Then he jumped down on the other side. But Bully took a shortcut. Crash! He went right through the fence and tackled Bugs. The weary rabbit struggled to his feet and Bully grabbed him. Bugs was shaking him from the tips of his furry ears to the ends of his furry toes. Can't we talk this over peacefully? He squeaked. Bully shook Bugs' hand and patted him on the back. I'm not mad at you, Bugs, he said. I was chasing you so I could thank you. Thank me? Gasped Bugs. Yes, Bully replied. You really set me straight on this tooth care business. It is important. I'm going right back to Dr. Gum for a checkup. You see, I get a pain in my tooth every time I bite anything. Bugs blinked. That's it, he shouted. You just gave me a rhyme for my poem. Almost forgot. Almost forgot. There's a difference between completely forgetting and almost forgot, so that's not strike 3. Be quiet. The next day was the beginning of Happy Tooth Week. Everyone was at the town square for the big celebration, and there were posters and banners everywhere. The mayor introduced Bugs on the platform. Then Bugs recited his new poem. I love my pretty pearly teeth, one row above, one beneath. I brush them morning, noon, and night, so they'll always help me bite. When Bugs finished reciting, everyone shouted and applauded him. 3 cheers for Bugs Bunny! The mayor cheered, Elmer Fudd cheered, Dr. Gum cheered, but the one who cheered the loudest of all was Bugs Bunny's brand new friend with a brand new filling in his tooth, Bully Benson. And that's the end of this book, too. I told you it was short, didn't I? Most children's books are going to be short. Like pictures, books like these, they are going to be short because of that very reason. So basically, this book is basically teaching kids about dental hygiene, about how that's a good thing, which it is. But when you become an adult, people are more like, well, it's up to me if I do or don't. Nobody can tell me what to do, which they're kind of true. But, it is what it is with that whole situation. But yeah, so this book, if you want to show your kids a good Bugs Bunny book, as well as teach them about dental hygiene, I guess this is good for you. But otherwise, if you just like Bugs Bunny, well, there you go. So yeah, that was Bugs Bunny Goes to the Dentist, and as well as Kate DiCamillo's Because of Winn-Dixie. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, of this live stream of me reading these two books. Tomorrow I will be making another poll, asking which of the books that you guys will have. The other books that were not picked from the last poll will be there. That being Percy Jackson and the Olympians, America's War on Drugs. What was the other one that I can't think of? Let me see real quick. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, like I said, America's War on Drugs, Percy Jackson, the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, plus the movie reaction to that book. Private Eye Protector. Those were the 3 books that were not picked from last time, but there's going to be 2 more books added into this poll. One is Gypsy Smith, an autobiography, which is the oldest book that I have in my book collection. And finally, and this will probably be the popular one, if not Percy Jackson, if you ask my opinion, The Hunger Games. The first book, The Hunger Games, which will also include the movie reaction as well, because I'm making it a goal to read every book that I have and to watch the movie version of every book. So that would include Percy Jackson, the Percy Jackson series, even though I know there's more of a series coming out more than the movies now. That would include them. Limited Snippets, a series of unfortunate events, but I feel like I would more or less go for the Netflix series than the movie itself, because the movie came out before the series ended. To my knowledge, I think that was the case. I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure that was the case. On top of that, you also have Harry Potter. And I said the Hunger Games, because I have all 3 books plus the new one that came out recently, and of course I'll be watching the movie based on that novel. I'm also looking at getting the Five Nights at Freddy's novelization, the book that's that's like the novelization of the movie. I want to get that as well, because I did enjoy the movie. It's not my absolute favorite, but I did enjoy it. So I would like to read the book and see what gets involved in there, and then watch the movie, because it is supposed to be based on the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Let me see, what else do we have? I got so many other different series of books there that I decided. Oh, I even have the 3 books based on the original Star Wars trilogy, and I mean that. I have the book version of the original Star Wars. I have the comic book version of The Empire Strikes Back, and I have the book version of Return of the Jedi. So I'm very much looking forward to when I read that. Yeah, definitely. And of course, they are in chronological order, so I'd be reading the Star Wars book first, then the Empire Strikes Back comic, then after that, and then Return of the Jedi. Whenever those three books are picked from my list of books that I made a list on. So yeah. In the meantime, off camera, I'm going to be reading. At the moment, off camera, I'm reading this book. And yes, that is a Stephen King book, and you damn well know this is going to be an R-rated book. Because if you know Stephen King, you know very much that he is known for being one of the most descriptive art writers in history. Period. Not just modern day history, but in a literature, period. Yes, he definitely is. And I've already told you, I can tell you, reading this book already, it's going to be rated R for sure. Because I don't know anything, I don't know of a Stephen King book that's not rated R, for my money. But in any case, this is literally a story for another time. Thank you guys so much for watching this video of me reading Because of Winn-Dixie plus Bugs Bunny Goes to the Dentist. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed either one or the other, if not both books. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole, signing off.